I got loyalty, got royalty inside my DNA. I got love, peace, got war and peace inside my DNA. I got poison, pain, and joy inside my DNA.
Hello and welcome back to my channel, Fanfic Fantasy. Join us as we delve into the realms of fanfiction and fantasy, bringing you the best stories and discussions. Today, we're kicking off the third part of our series, What If Issei Had Level Up System with multiple boosted gears and had Harem? If you enjoy this video, please give it a like and subscribe for more content in the future. The author of this story is SeerKing from ff.net. All the relevant links are in the description. Feel free to say hello to the author on their profile. Now, let's dive into the fanfic. Chapter 10, Discourse X Devils. That night, Issei's bedroom, Hyoto residence. Gamer's gear. He whispered, "Game on." In a flare of blue light, Issei's right arm became the sapphire-colored limb that signified the appearance of his first sacred gear. He flexed and moved his arm, eyes absently taking in the dancing, reflective shine from his bedroom's light, deep in thought. I have to go to a set location tomorrow and talk to the devils. A location they are both aware of and likely familiar with while I've never stepped foot there before. The Sekiryude thought, forcing himself to remain calm. If I was watching this happen on an anime, I would be screaming it's a trap at the screen at the top of my voice, probably calling the protagonist an idiot with every other breath too. Still, I don't think Gremory-senpai or Citri Kaichu would go against their word on a neutral meeting. It just wouldn't match their character. I think that was the crux of the matter. He only knew their public human personas, rather than who they were as devils. For all he knew, Ria's Gremory's actual personality was totally different. Yet, a part of him thought that with her, what you saw was what you got. That the red-haired girl only kept the parts of her that belonged in the supernatural world hidden. He didn't know where that thought came from, but he had a strange disinclination to mistrust it. He noticed a small square outline at the base of his forearm near the elbow. It had an odd shape on it, kinda like a tree diagram. Being the impulsive sort, he touched it without really thinking about it. A screen popped up in front of him, with that self-same tree diagram on it. Gamer's Gear Evolution Tree. The Gamer's Gear, unlike most other sacred gears, allows the user to choose how it changes and evolves. Using this dendrogram, you can choose how to evolve the Gamer's Gear and gain special abilities, skills, and equipment additions. In order to evolve the Gamer's Gear, sacred gear points are required. You receive 2 SGP when you level up, as well as bonus SGP as rewards for using either of your sacred gears in combat, and for defeating boss monsters. You currently have 5 SGP stored up. Ordinarily, you would have more from defeating a boss 3 levels above you, but as you didn't actually fight it, you were penalized for that. Great. He was being penalized for something out of his control. Wasn't that a familiar situation for him or what? Moving past his self-derision, Issei examined the lowermost point of the branching options, which had a single option, costing a single SGP. He pressed it to find out more details. Revelation. Only the holders of the 2 Gamer's Gears can truly understand the unique shift that holding their sacred gears have on their worldview. But with this skill you can allow those around you to catch a brief glimpse of the world through your eyes. When activated, this ability allows any designated ally within a certain range to see the names, titles, and levels of those around them for a set period of time after activation. You can set instructions as to whether they are allowed to see from your own information, and if so, exactly how much of it. You can even set titles that you own but do not have equipped. Truthfully, it was a fairly useless skill in Issei's opinion. Just about the only thing that it could do was help him to deceive the devils as to who he was. By switching out his titles, levels, and names, he could keep who he was a secret for a little longer. He was certain that it was only a matter of time before the 2 heiresses discovered his real identity. Neither of them was stupid, and Sona Citri especially was no one's fool. It would only take a certain amount of time and effort to match up when the red armored warrior showed up and when Oppai Baka Issei Hyoto disappeared. And that was without the various types of magic, and God only knows what else they had available to them. Still, that wasn't a major issue. He'd never expected to be able to hide forever after he found out he was going to school with actual devils. No, it was merely a stopgap to buy him time to level up to the point that he was strong enough that he could hold his own if things ended in a confrontation with them. The fact that there were likely devils far stronger given their respective ages and descriptions was something Issei would have to work out later. For now he needed to focus on his current issue. Confirming he was going to select the upgrade, he saw a red ring appear around it, indicating it had been purchased. There was a choice of 3 upgrades in the next level that cost 2 SGP each, and he could only select one of them, locking the other 2 out. One would make his sacred gear arm elastic like rubber, letting him attack from a distance with it. Another allowed him to enlarge it to the same size as his body, vastly increasing the damage he could deal in close combat. It was the last, however, that caught Issei's attention. Rather than adding to his combat abilities, this upgrade allowed him to add 20% to the EXP gain for all of his skills and spells, as well as 10% to his regular EXP gain. The first two were flashy attacks that he recognized from One Piece and Busu Renkin respectively. Monkey D. Luffy's Rubber Fruit and the Arms Alchemy Little Gulliver. Both were abilities that both looked awesome and would immediately add to the gamer's gear's combat ability. Both could likely be groomed into a fighting style that relied solely on using the blue gauntlet as their weapon of choice. However, it was the third choice that caught Issei's attention. While not as impressive looking or as immediately valuable, the short and long-term benefits it would provide would far outweigh the immediate benefits of either combat upgrade. Added to that, he'd already developed several abilities and skills to allow him to fight without his gauntlet active, and neither his developing swordplay nor his magic would mesh well with either of the first two abilities. Choosing either combat ability would merely be adding another weapon where he already had several decent ones, while the third option augmented all of his abilities, allowing him to grow faster in several ways. You make a very sensible, logical, and calculated decision. You earn +1 Ys and +1 SGP. A vein pulsed on Issei's forehead. That sounded far more like an insult than anything complimentary. Cheeky bastard. Selecting the upgrade, which was named Learned Wisdom, Issei inspected the next level. Each of the 4 available abilities cost 3 SPG each and had to select 2 of them before this tier locked and he could move on. The first, Sapphire Armor, added additional armor to the gamer's gear, tripling it to 300. The second, Sapphire Blade, let him reshape the blue gauntlet and the arm beneath it into a sword that was not only nearly indestructible, having no durability score to worry about, and could be upgraded and enhanced via an independent screen. Lastly, Ruby Vision let him see the names of his enemies' attacks and spells, and Ruby Sight let him have some form of combat precognition. Unlike the last 3 options, all 4 of these had about the same level of potential, and in similar ways. The least useful, at least for him anyway, was the Sapphire Armor. While it would give the gamer's gear an impressive shield, armor buff, he relied on moving out of the way of attacks rather than absorbing the hits with armor. Not useless by any means, but not fitting with the character design he was building on. A DPS over a tank. Not to mention he didn't usually fight with either of his sacred gears active, saving them for trump cards in case he was overwhelmed. He was seriously considering its counterpart, the Sapphire Blade. He'd only developed the most basic of skills in hand-to-hand combat, instead having chosen to focus on developing his swordplay instead. Having an indestructible sword that couldn't be removed from his person without killing him up his sleeve in case he was somehow unable to access his inventory or had simply had all his other options destroyed was a tempting offer. Plus, he could upgrade it as well, meaning he could likely develop it into a truly badass weapon. Ruby Sight and Ruby Vision were a bit of a toss-up. Both looked like they could be very useful in similar ways. In terms of sheer combat practicality, a form of precognition was hard to beat, even if it was limited to just 10 seconds. However, the ability to tell just what type of attack or spell his enemies were launching could be very useful in predicting what they did and how to counter or avoid them. In the end, the choice was made when he looked ahead. Sight had no upgrades linked to it in future tiers, leaving it at just what it was. Vision, on the other, had at least 4 different boxes linked to it, showing a great deal of potential for growth. The choice between a stagnant skill and one that could grow and evolve as he did was a fairly obvious one in Issei's books. Nodding, Issei decided to go with Ruby Vision first and save Sapphire Blade for after he gained some more SGP. It would hopefully not take long to do that so long as he started using his sacred gears in fights more frequently. He was already planning on putting them through their paces after he found Agent Flamberge. That one had been responsible for the murder of over 30 of his own comrades, and Issei would be only too happy to show the bastard why he was upset with them. That kind of senseless slaughter needed to be answered for. He didn't know if Flamberge was male or female, or even what they looked like, but he would be able to find them thanks to his gamer's gear. For anyone other than the gamer, a title represented an important aspect of a person that influenced either how they thought of themselves, how others perceived them, or both, such as Rias Gremory's heiress of the House of Gremory title. Someone who had one title that they considered important to them and a title considered important by others would sometimes have a dual title, showing both at the same time. Again, to use Ria's Gremory as an example, she was both a heiress of the House of Gremory, which was likely based on others' perspective, and the crimson-haired ruined princess, which linked to her own personal views. Unless Flambridge was able to hide their title somehow, there was no hiding from Issei's gaze. Dismissing the screen and his sacred gear, Issei headed to bed. Today had been a long day and tomorrow wasn't likely to be any easier. The next day, or Clubroom. So Ria's, what's the plan? Aquino asked as she served her king a cup of tea. Pausing to sip the tea and savor the taste. Aquino always did brew excellent tea, Ria's answered. There is no plan, Aquino. You know as well as I do how tenuous our relationship with this armored man is. The man was positively skittish when we met earlier, despite his attempts at calm and bravado, and, if his own statements are true, has no knowledge of us outside the old legends, which, I will remind you, fail to paint devils in any type of fair light. If we try anything underhanded or dramatic in hopes of discovering his identity, and he discovers them, there is a good chance he'll simply disappear, and we lose a valuable prospect for no gain. Taking another sip of her tea, Ria shook her head slowly. No, our best bet is to take this slowly and let him get to know us for us and build trust over time. Then we make an offer as honest and reasonable while putting the benefits offered in as best a light as possible. The reincarnated Nephilim nodded. Understood. This situation with the Purifiers is worrying though. The redhead nodded as she placed her teacup on her desk before adopting her thinking pose, or the Gendo pose as Aquino sometimes called it. Letting her watch Evangelion had been a mistake. Both she and Sona had read the letter that the wielder of the gamer's gear had given them, and it had been a mixture of darkly amusing, horrifying, and heart-achingly sad. The act of a fallen had led a simple human to join the Purifiers in a war against all things supernatural. This in turn led to the creation of those Ratmen, only for him to end up betrayed and murdered by his own creations, dying full of doubt, worries, and regrets. The key point that worries me is that there might be more to these Purifiers than what is visible at first glance. Rias muttered, more to herself than Aquino. It seems utterly ludicrous, on the face of it, for a group of ordinary humans, bereft of even any magical abilities of their own, to try and attack the supernatural races, but this letter is very compelling. If it's genuine, Aquino demurred, playing the devil's advocate. True, the crimson-haired ruined princess agreed wearily, though she personally doubted it was faked. This entire situation was far too contrived to be any sort of deception. The costs of setting it up would far outstrip any gains it could provide. Where are the others? I was certain that they knew about our meeting with our human friend at your shrine. Two of the perverted trio are being chased around by Murayama-san and the other Kendo Club girls. Hiba-kun's trying to stop them from being unmanned. Aquino covered her mouth to hide her amusement. It faded somewhat when she recalled that Hyoto Issei hadn't been seen peeping with the other two, meaning that either he had gotten better at hiding or that he had stopped peeping with them. Given that he had almost been killed by the madman who had invaded his home, it wasn't too hard for Aquino, who had been forced to watch her mother being killed in front of her by the fanatical members of the Heimjima clan, to see he may have had a change in his priorities after that. He had walked away with a physical reminder of his brush with death, a thin scar down one side of his cheek. Those kinds of situations can change a person, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. Haniko-chan is just getting some snacks. She should be here soon. The queen continued. What about Citri-sama? Sona'll be here as soon as she finishes organizing the student council. Rias answered easily. The addition of Saji Junshiro to her peerage has made it easier, as they're all devils now. I don't think Sona will bring along more members than we have in case we spook our friend. In fact, Rias suspected that Sona would only bring Saji along so as to make the situation similar to the last time they met. Her childhood friend was astute enough to know that panicking their erstwhile ally with new faces could end badly for them. Eventually, all of her peerage, plus Sona and Saji, were gathered in the room. Sona brought everyone's attention to her with a slight cough. Our objective here is to find information out regarding the makers of the Ratmen, the Purifiers, she said, adjusting her glasses with one delicate hand. Beelzebub-sama's men discovered that the burrow from yesterday had been magically filled in with concrete, and several, as of yet, unidentified substances at some point after we left it, so he has no further leads. This has made him somewhat irked. He has already requested that Rias and I pass along any information the red armored man provides us. Wouldn't it be simpler to have Beelzebub-sama meet this guy in person then? Saji asked in confusion. Looking at him flatly, the Citri heiress pinched the bridge of her nose as she replied. Rias and I are only just over 3 times his level, and it is very obvious that us going near the wielder of the gamer's gear makes him extremely nervous at the least. He may have a heart attack if a Satan-class devil goes near him, especially since all of the current Mao are said to be many times more powerful than the originals. Sorry, Kaichu, Saji replied nervously, blushing in embarrassment. Minutes later, the group of devils teleported to Akino's shrine via a transport circle. It had taken some diplomacy from Sona's elder sister to get the Shinto pantheon to let a devil live there without being damaged by the wards, but it had been managed in the end. Whenever Akino had some time, she spent it here. Whoa. This is awesome, Saji muttered. The shrine was small, but obviously well kept. The trees surrounding it at the edges of the paving stones were both well trimmed and looked natural, a hard feat to pull off. The shrine itself was spotless and well maintained as well. Even the Torii gate looked brand new. Kaneko stiffened and pointed at the gate. Someone's there. An echoing chuckle reverberated around the grounds and a dark form rose out of the shadow of the gate, throwing back its hood to reveal the red, dragon-themed helm of the man from the previous day. In a flash of light and with a swipe of his hands, the black, shadowy cloak he wore changed to the basic brown cape he had worn the previous day. How do you keep managing to track me down? The red armored figure asked Kaneko curiously. Most of my gear that isn't armor is dedicated to either enhancing my physical abilities or concealing my identity and presence. Isn't hiding your Kai? Kaneko stated bluntly. Seeing as I didn't know that was a thing before now, it isn't of any surprise. The man offered bemusedly. Oh well, live and learn. Eres Gremory, Eres Citri. Everyone, I trust you all had an uneventful day. Yes, yourself? Riaz asked politely. Somewhat. I was ambushed by Ratman on the way here. The man answered. Despite the monotone his voice was, the gathered devils could hear the irritation in it. Disposable assassins whose bodies melted into nothing once they were dead. More annoying than anything else. They're striking in broad daylight. That was certainly unpleasant news for Riaz to think about. Where was the attack? A small alley about halfway between here and Kyo Academy. He answered. It surprised me, considering their breeder is dead. Are you certain? Sona asked. It was the size of a 3-story house and I used the Purifier's own cleansing system to destroy the base and everything with it, starting with the breeder. The gamer answered dryly. I also got a notification and experience points for defeating it. So yes, I am very sure that the breeder is dead. I also know it could not be cloned, made to have bred another breeder or duplicated in most regular ways. Unless another supernatural faction is working with them, I cannot see how they can afford to keep up the human wave tactics. This made the Citri heiress raise an eyebrow, slightly impressed. It was not often that someone so completely shut down any possible argument from her like that. I am only aware of a small group of fallen in Kyo aside from our peerages, Riaz said with a frown. Aside from the migrant yokai, that is. There's also a captured dwarf in the hands of the Purifiers. The red-armored man interjected. He pulled a fine steel sword from his inventory. This sword was, according to the item description my sacred gear provides, forged by a captured dwarf smith. I took it from the corpse of the first boss that I slew. If the Purifiers were the ones who gave this to Byral Warfang, then it is likely that they not only have the dwarf, but other supernaturals imprisoned. Both kings exchanged looks. Dwarves were mainly from the Norse pantheon and Odin did not take any of his subjects being captured or imprisoned lightly, even if he usually played the carefree, dirty old man. Things had just gotten even more complicated. Thank you for that, Sona sighed as she massaged her forehead. It wasn't really his fault. He was just holding up his end of the bargain and providing whatever information he could about the situation. Now then, shall we get to the main point of this meeting? Riaz asked, crossing her arms. What, exactly, do you know about these Purifiers? Exactly as I've told you, the Purifiers are apparently a group of humans who hate anything and everything supernatural. The red-armored man offered with a shrug. It extends from supernatural races, such as devils, to humans with magic or spiritual power, to even those who simply possess a sacred gear. The initial targets of their attacks are the biblical factions, and they created the Ratmen as expendable shock troops, designed for a combination of human wave tactics and mass ambushes. Kyo was chosen to be the testing grounds of the Ratmen as both of you are here, and the Fallen would be left to act as scapegoats and possibly spark a renewal of your great war to weaken your factions further. As of this moment, all of the Ratman boroughs that I know of have been put to the sword. But there are at least 2 other Purifier facilities in Kyo that I plan on visiting shortly. Oh yes, here. Reaching into his inventory, the gamer pulled out several piles of paperwork and handed them to the Gremory peerage. These are the files belonging to Project Rat King that I confiscated before destroying the base, he said with a nod. They ought to be interesting reading for whoever is investigating the Ratmen. I wouldn't advise reading them yourselves though, particularly if you are in any way squeamish. I barely skimmed through a few of the files and was nearly sick from it. What these mad bastards did ... It was pretty gruesome reading. Sona nodded and teleported the reports to her house. She'd take them with her when she went to see Beelzebub Sama tonight with Riaz. Anything else? She asked. There's at least one member of the Purifiers still active in the area, codenamed Agent Flamberge. The gamer growled. Apparently whoever Agent Flamberge was, he or she had done something to earn this man's wrath. They're responsible for the murder of over 30 of their fellow Purifiers. I have a memo that basically ordered them to tie up any loose ends before going to a new location to enact Project Rat Poison in the event of a Ratman rebellion. They never even suspected whoever did it. Tiba in particular looked angry at that. Disgusting. The young knight practically spat. Agreed. I'm looking forward to explaining my displeasure to Flamberge in person at some point in the near future. Such things must be answered for, the red-armored man stated, flexing one hand demonstratively. I will, however, do all that I can to leave enough of him so you can extract as much information about the Purifiers as you can. What happens to them after that is not my problem. That was understandable. No regular human was supposed to know about the supernatural. Those with magical, spiritual or mystical abilities, as well as those who possess Kai abilities and sacred gears, were usually the only exemptions to this rule. As the Purifiers had been preparing to attack the devils, Sona and Riaz in particular, handing a Purifier over to them, alive and able to spill any secrets they had, would be an excellent move on their possible allies' part. It would certainly endear him to SeerKing and Serafal. Those two would move the earth for those who helped their siblings. Do you have any idea why we were chosen as their first targets? Riaz asked, sounding a bit peeved. Understandable, really. According to what I've found, out of the three factions the devils have both the most solid power base, and have the most easily exploited weaknesses. The red-armored man answered calmly. From what I've been able to infer, the fallen and regular angels do not suffer from any weaknesses as exploitable as a devil's natural weakness to light and holy attributes. The fallen are scattered and their leadership is disorganized at best and fractured amongst the various leaders at worst. Likewise, the lack of any true miracles in recent centuries and the weakening of the church's power has also led to the angels faction slowly losing power as well. Devils, on the other hand, have been steadily rebuilding their numbers, and your contract system has allowed you to gain back your strength much more quickly. So take down the strongest and the rest can be handled later, is it? Sona shook her head disapprovingly. How would they stop us from simply retreating to the underworld for a few decades until the Purifiers are dead? The fact that the Purifiers are hypocrites, the gamer stated flatly. I do not care how much technology they have. Creating the Ratman required at least some magical knowledge, not to mention the use of warpstone as a catalyst. There is no way in hell that stuff is natural in any way, shape, or form. They have someone able to cast spells in their ranks, by persuasion or threats I do not know. They could be planning some way to trap you here or force you to reveal your inhuman features or whatever. I know that your wings are manifestations of your magic, but I doubt those hate-filled idiots do. Devil magic and human magic are very different things, Riaz pointed out with a frown. Human magic relies on mathematical calculations, while the magic of a devil relies on the caster's imagination. A single human magic caster would not be able to accomplish the first possibility, and as you just said, the second one is impossible. Are there any artifacts that could add to a caster's power? The man asked curiously. Aside from a select few sacred gears, yours included, no. Sona shook her head. The infinite dragon god, Ophis, is supposedly able to bestow snakes upon people to increase their power. But Ophis has not been seen in ages. Several of the 13 Longinus could do something similar, such as the boosted gear, but they are rare and powerful sacred gears rarely distributed by the god of the Bible. Other magical and divine artifacts are either sealed, kept within hand's reach of the deity, or spellcaster that it belongs to, are known to be in the hands of some faction or the other or have been destroyed. It is impossible. Has the wielder of the Tartarus Gamer's gear been spotted recently? The Gaia Gamer's gear wielder asked sharply. No. You are the first to emerge since the deaths of the previous wielders. Sona answered with a shake of her head. Of course, you could simply be the first to appear due to the other one lying low. Unlikely, as, from what few records I could find of them, the owners of the Tartarus gear tend to be far from subtle in their actions. I know little of the history of my sacred gear or the nemesis I inherited because of it. The armored man admitted. I suspect heavily that there is some manner of sentience inside of it, but no proof. The history of your sacred gear is almost as mysterious to us. The Citri heiress replied honestly. Just about all we know is that the God of the Bible created them shortly before the suspension of hostilities between the three factions and the start of the uneasy unofficial ceasefire that had endured since then, and a couple mentions of their previous wielders doing battle. The only ones who might have an idea are some of the higher-ranked angels. They purportedly knew their master and creator's movements rather well. I see. The gamer nodded. Incidentally, why is it that you constantly use God of the Bible rather than a shorter turn of phrase? Because simply calling the God of the Bible by his bare name damages devils. Even someone else saying it in close proximity affects us. Riaz answered simply. Not badly though. It's more like a sudden bad headache most of the time, because actual believers in Christianity have become much rarer in the last few centuries. That sounds like a very big hoax. The human stated flatly, his disbelief obvious. Say it. Sona challenged him. God, the gamer stated, and every devil present flinched in pain. He looked at an invisible screen before him. According to my sacred gear, I just caused every devil within earshot 10 points of holy damage via the system of ... the God of the Bible. Because of the devil weakness to the holy element, that's 20 points of damage. Saji looked kind of spacey for a moment before he recovered. Understandable, as he was the weakest devil present by far. This is unbelievable. Why go through all the trouble of writing that into his system? The gamer shook his helmeted head in shock. It seems like a lot of effort for an effect that seems pettily spiteful. The original Lucifer rebelled against him and created beings that are the exact opposite to true angels in essence and purpose, Riaz stated. As Lucifer was one of his first living creations, that must have been galling. No one knows the mind of the God of the Bible, not even his angels, but we have to assume that he intends to get around to removing us from the world at some point. Until he wants to do so and restarts the war for that purpose, his system acts as a reminder to every devil, pureblood or reincarnated, that he is watching and punishing us for the sin our existence reminds him of. Sounds like a bad case of sour grapes to me. The red-armored man shrugged before suddenly stiffening and drawing his red metal gladius and another short sword, made from the same red metal, that had several large serrations running down one side of it. Tiba quickly identified it as a swordbreaker, a form of parrying blade designed to catch, block, and deflect attacking blades. Ratman, the gamer said tensely as chittering cackles started to resound from around them. Prepare for combat. Several shadows detached themselves from the trees, revealing hunched-over Ratman clad in black and gray outfits and carrying rusty-looking swords and daggers in their forepaws. Some had green-tinged blades that the experienced gamer quietly informed them were warp blades, weapons with blades forged from that warpstone material and poisonous to the touch. It has been a while, man-thing. A soft voice said as a figure of pure darkness materialized out of the shadows in much the same way that the gamer had. Snitch, so murdering the Council of 13 wasn't enough for you, I see. The red-armored man said calmly, though whether it was fear or anger he was repressing Sona couldn't be sure. You want to add me to your list of victims too? What ... who ... is this? Riaz asked calmly, eyeing the newcomer cautiously. Oh, do tell her, man-thing. The Ratman chuckled. I like my future marks to know who will take their heads. This, Riaz Gremory, is the Ratman known as Snitch, the Death Master. He is the master assassin of the Ratman people and almost killed me a few days ago. The gamer pointed the gladius at Snitch threateningly. You've gotten stronger, Rat. Did murdering your former masters give you a boost in power? Snitch chuckled again. To finally be rid of those fools that claimed to be the council but were just puppets. It was a heady feeling. Man-thing. I am indeed stronger. Soon, I shall come to ply my trade on these fools, but for the moment I have far more important targets. As apologies, my underlings will entertain you. To the Ratman, he barked, kill slay them. As the ninja-esque Ratman advanced, Snitch himself returned to the shadows and vanished. Gamer's gear. The armored man shouted. Game on. In a flash, the blue sacred gear appeared on his arm. Show the devils the truth of this world. The gamer commanded, raising his right arm to point his sword at the sky. What are you? Riaz started. Revelation. A wave of blue light erupted from the sacred gear and struck every devil in the area. Minorly disorientated, Sona blinked her eyes before she focused on one of the approaching Ratmen and blinked again as she spotted words floating above its head. Gutter Runner LV-15. Throat slitter. Quickly, she turned her head to look at the person who had caused all of this, only to be disappointed. Red-armored man LV-15. Ratcatcher, what is this? She demanded. Look through my eyes. This is the world for me ever since the gamer's gear activated. The man answered ruefully. Deciding to shelve the matter until later, Sona analyzed the enemies. Most were gutter runners at level 15, with a couple at level 16. A small number were a different class completely. Assassin Initiate LV-16. Gizzard Gasher. Assassin Neophyte LV-17. Blood Spiller. The most powerful one was Trebling. Lesser Assassin LV-20. Sneering 1. Advice on fighting these things? Kiba asked calmly, his eyes sharply moving between the advancing rat creatures. A normal human is physically stronger than they are, but they are a lot faster and more agile. The Ratmen also have no compunctions about fighting fair, the gamer said firmly. The ninja types like to use their tails to use a third weapon to sneak attack you. Most use a concealed poison spike near the tip as a weapon. Any Ratman who isn't a slave will also use teamwork, but they do not care about the deaths of their fellows. The leaders also remain at the rear unless forced. Any one of you aside from Saji there could handily kill all of these Ratmen without breaking a sweat. But you, I'll test them. The knight stated, stepping forward, his offer less of a question than a statement. Go on. The redhead nodded. With an act of his will, a steel sword erupted from the ground and was grabbed by the blonde boy. The next second, he moved in a blur, slicing through several of the gutter runners as if they were cardboard cutouts. The startled shrieks and gurgles of the dying Ratmen were cut off as the reincarnated sacred gear user delivered mercy strikes to them, impaling their hearts with swift, precise stabs and cuts to their hearts and throats respectively. Whoa, as expected of a level 30+ reincarnated devil. The red-armored man said with a touch of admiration in his voice. Several shuriken flew through the air at him even as he spoke, but he simply raised a sword and said, Lesser Barrier Shield. A red magic circle appeared in front of him that deflected all of the throwing stars without so much as a crack. Not that it was much of a surprise. Ordinary steel could only do so much against magic. Hiba, fall back for now. Akino, try your magic. Riaz ordered. Let's see how much they can take. The Yamato Nechiko giggled. Then, with a flick of her fingers, yellow magic circles formed over her hand and arcs of golden energy surged outward. The electrical magic struck a pair of assassin initiates, frying them in barely a handful of seconds. Ara, so frail. How disappointing. They're more vulnerable to fire magic than lightning. The gamer mentioned lightly. That was thunder magic. Sona corrected him as she sent a wave of water blades to slice several advancing gutter runners into pieces. Lightning contains a fragment of light element, so very few devils can wield it safely. Leaving aside the fact that Akino could in fact use lightning, as she was the daughter of Barakil, the fallen angel of lightning. The former Nephilim simply chose to use the lesser thunder magic and had never touched her heritage from her father for personal reasons. Huh, the man said noncommittedly, between Kaneko smashing a pair into a tree after their blades shattered against her rook-given defense, Riaz blasting several into dust with her power of destruction, and the red-armored man beheading a couple with quick and precise cuts of his blade, it was clear that the Ratmen were badly outmatched. When one pulled out a bottle, the armored man shouted hurriedly, Tiba, kill that Ratman before he has a chance to drink. That's witchbrew, a potion that turns the drinker into a berserker. The Ratman even had alchemical potions to use. Sona, who had some basic knowledge of alchemy, was now very firmly of the opinion that someone in the supernatural world was guiding the Ratmen, even if they weren't aware of it. No newly created race could come up with something like witchbrew without outside help. The problem was solved by Kiba bisecting the assassin from crown to groin. As the two halves of the body fell apart in an explosion off gore, the red-armored man charged into the middle of the rest of the Ratmen, lashing out with his twin blades and causing chaos among the panicking assassins. As the level 20 assassin leader turned to flee, the red-armored man pointed his swords at the retreating rat and shouted, Flame Spear. A red burst of fire launched itself from both of his weapons and buried themselves in the back of the cowardly Ratman, covering it in flames and ending its life. A blink later, and all of the bodies had melted away, leaving no trace that they ever existed. TCH, I need to get my hands around Snitch's scrawny neck. The gamer almost growled in frustration. That sadistic little bastard is far too dangerous to let him wander free. Kaneko, did you sense that Ratman whatsoever? Riaz asked her rook. No. Kai was blending in with surroundings. Couldn't read it. The petite girl answered shortly. Apparently his title of Master Assassin is not just for show. It figures he'd have some way of keeping himself concealed from most types of detection. The gamer sighed, sounding far more exhausted than he looked. Some sort of skill or training, or perhaps a magic item like my Cloak of Shadows. Whichever it is, it'll be a pain to be on guard from being backstabbed by Snitch until I find a way around it. Do the Ratmen know who you really are? Sona asked sharply. No, but I imagine they have a better than human sense of smell, so tracking me from one of the burrows to my base won't be too difficult for them. He answered, "Oh, congratulations on becoming level 7, Saji-san." The Citri heiress looked around, and indeed, Saji was now level 7. Hell, he was in your party when you killed 4 or 5 Ratmen with a lazy flick of your fingers. Obviously, he got some of the experience points from your kills. The man replied, "Once he's level 8, he won't have to worry about the sunlight weakening him, as the devil's weakness to light is just uncomfortable from that level up." Useful to know. Hiba commented, "Can I ask where you got that second blade you were using?" It was a quest reward for conquering the 7 Ratman burrows, in addition to EXP, cash, and my Ratcatcher title. The gamer answered as he stowed his blades away in his inventory. "As long as I have it active, I cause fear in all Ratmen. Those who don't feel fear or can control themselves are immune to it, like Snitch and his pet assassins seem to be. And that magic ... that wasn't human magic or devil magic, at least not as I've experienced them." Sona adjusted her glasses with a slender finger. "You mean my flame spear? It's a simple tier 1 lesser fire magic spell." The man sounded confused. "Lesser fire magic? Tier? I've never heard of any magic using those terms before." The frown on her face deepened, making Sona look a lot more intimidating. But both Heimjima-san and Heiress Gremory over there use tiered magic too. Dual Thunder Call, a tier 4 spell, and Lesser Destruction Blast, a tier 2 spell, respectively. The gamer responded slowly, a hand rising to cup his chin in thought. Maybe it's some sort of categorization system unique to the gamer's gear. "My spell was weaker than Akino's." Riaz arched an eyebrow. "It was lower ranked. That doesn't necessarily mean it was weaker." Sona corrected her. "The Bale family's magic, Power of Destruction, wasn't given that title for nothing. Correct?" The gamer nodded. "In a direct contest of power, I suspect even my most powerful offensive spells, Flame Bomb and Earth Shot, would be defeated by the weakest spell that any wielder of the Power of Destruction could manifest. Heimjima-san's spell was the highest ranked spell I have seen since my sacred gear granted me the ability to see the names and tiers of the spells and skills people around me use. Still, is that the strongest spell you can use, Heiress Gremory? It isn't a spell so much as I shape my Power of Destruction into a blast, the size of which depends on my target, and I just fire it." The crimson-haired ruined princess stated with a shrug. "That's all I've needed to do so far." "That won't work against someone who is strong enough, Riaz," Sona warned her friend. "A phoenix, just as an example, would shrug off your blasts thanks to their immortal regeneration. The House of Phoenix is another one of the noble houses of the underworld. They have similar abilities to that of an actual phoenix, including the ability to almost endlessly regenerate damage, create healing tiers, control wind, heat and fire, and their wings are always made of shaped fire rather than standard solidified magic." She added as an aside to the gamer, "Why would she have to fight a phoenix?" That sounded as if you were trying to make a point to her. He asked curiously, his helmed gaze moving slowly between the two heiresses. "My parents have engaged me to a phoenix, their youngest son in fact," Riaz stated sourly. "He's a shameless rake with absolutely no respect for women and an ego that suffocates everyone around him. I'm currently trying every trick in the book to get free of the engagement. But my last option is to face him in a raiding game, a fight where our peerages battle one another while in an arena that has spells on it to prevent death or serious maiming. He has a full peerage and I do not, plus he is an experienced battler in the raiding games. Add in his phoenix regeneration and it's almost hopeless." After a moment where he stood stock still, the red-armored man muttered something under his breath and a window appeared in front of him. With deft, experienced touches at fast speeds, he searched through to find something. It would have looked very weird if they hadn't been able to see the screens he'd manifested. When he stopped, he chuckled. Immortal my foot. A phoenix's regeneration is not almighty. Hit him with some holy water and his regeneration gets reduced by 3/4, he said in triumph. Illegal in raiding games. Sona shook her head. Well, there are ways of taking down regenerators in games. Presumably they would work here too. The gamer mused. Care to hear my ideas? It's worth a shot. Riaz shrugged. Well, the first idea, use the weakness of the regeneration, isn't possible because of that rule. So then, the second is to hit him hard enough and fast enough that his regeneration can't keep up with it. I assume that in a raiding game, taking the opposing king down equals defeat for the entire peerage like it does in chess. That's true, but Razor isn't a fool. He'll send his peerage out to fight and only emerge if he catches sight of Riaz Butchu. Akino shook her head. By that point, either she'll have been forced to move due to us being defeated or Razor will have no pieces left and will be greatly weakened. I'm just stating strategies. It's up to you to work them into your plans. The gamer shrugged. Another commonality with regenerators is that often, the regeneration doesn't kick off until whatever made the wound leave the flesh. So assuming Kiba-san here can sprout swords from the ground to impale this razor at the right moment, that should restrain him and prevent his regeneration for a time. He'd burn through them with his fire. Sona countered. The armored man paused and quickly looked back down as a new screen appeared. Kiba-san's sacred gear sword birth allows him to create swords with unique enchantments, yes. Correct. Kiba agreed. Then why not create swords that nullify or are immune to fire or heat? Kiba and Riaz both paused to blink in surprise, before Riaz slapped a palm to her forehead and started muttering to herself. Kiba himself looked pensive, closing his eyes for a moment. A second later, a long sword with a blade seemingly made from ice emerged from the ground handle first. This is called Flame Delete. It nullifies any flame magic and acts as an amplifier for ice magics. It's usually a bit more difficult to craft enchanted swords. I've never tried doing that with anything other than a normal steel sword, Kiba stated thoughtfully, though it is certainly possible, especially if I'm only creating a single type multiple times. It's definitely something I can work towards. We'll work out a training program for that when we get home, agreed Riaz with a firm nod, still internally cursing herself as an idiot, before turning her attention back to the red armored man. Any other ideas? Make the attacks so painful that they cause his mind to shut down, the gamer suggested. I don't care if he can regenerate, his mind should have an upper threshold for the amount of pain he can feel. True, Riaz agreed thoughtfully, a small vindictive smile forming on her lips. Her distaste for her so-called fiancé probably made the idea far more appealing than it should. Regeneration aside, Razor is an average young devil, cocky and arrogant. Most people who face him expect to lose because of his Fennex abilities, so the chances are that he has rarely had to suffer much in the way of pain. Combined with fire-nullifying swords from Kiba to pin him down, and we may have a plan. Developing a new spell for that situation would take quite some time, Sona pointed out. Unless Kiba can make a pain sword as well, I can't see this as being practical. The blonde boy focused for a moment and a new blade emerged from the ground nearby. It superficially resembled a scimitar, but it had a serrated edge and looked like a torture device. This is Painsage, a sword that magnifies any and all sensations of pain by 3 with every cut. He looked a bit disturbed. Evidently he had not pushed his ability to create such esoteric swords before this point. Then again, his general attitude was to uphold the code of chivalry, so using swords with such unfair tricks to them would count as something he'd avoid when at all possible. That's one possibility, Riaz said, her blue eyes gleaming at this, though she frowned slightly in thought. Though this puts a great deal on Kiba-kun to both lock down and then weaken Riser. I have access to a store that lets me buy things. I could look through it for spells for Heimjima-san and yourself, Eris Gremory, the gamer offered. Considering that you're helping me, call me Riaz, the redhead said with a smile. And please do. It took a couple of minutes for him to find books that suited the situation, but find them he did. For Akino, he found 2, one called Thunderfield, which allowed the caster to surround the target of her spell with electricity that damaged them over time and caused quite a bit of pain as well. And Nervebreaker, a thunder spell that directly attacked the nervous system of the target, damaging it and raising the target's pain sensitivity. In Riaz's case, there were not many spells that had anything to do with the power of destruction, but there were 2 that suited the situation. One was Cellular Destruction, which used a blast similar to the regular power of destruction spells that Riaz used, but it attacked the target on a cellular level, making their cells explode. It was apparently one of the most painful spells the gamer had ever seen. The last spell was Destruction Blade, a close combat spell that surrounded the user's flattened hand and forearm in the power of destruction, forging a blade that could cut through almost anything if practiced enough. With practice, the characteristics of other spells the caster had access to could be infused into it. Such as Cellular Destruction. Watching the 2 devils absorb the purchased skill books using the gamer's help, some new function of his sacred gear he had unlocked just now apparently, was fascinating for Sona. And worrying. With simple human currency he offered to his sacred gear, the gamer of Gaia could purchase powerful spells and other skills that he could use against his enemies almost immediately, albeit at a fairly weak level. And that was just a part of his sacred gear's functions. As an enemy, he was one of the worst types she could think of, one that could change and adapt to whoever and whatever his enemies were if given enough time and resources. As an ally, she could think of none better. Keep faith with him and he'd support them with everything he had. She was good enough at reading people to see that he was helping Riaz because he thought she deserved a chance to fight for her freedom and that he was sympathetic to her plight. This did earn him some points with her, as she had a soft spot for Riaz, even if she didn't let anyone else know about it. Anyone who helped her friend was alright in her book. Sona just hoped that nothing happened to make them have to fight him. Later, streets of Kyoto. Well, that went a lot better than I thought it would. Issei thought in relief as he walked. He was out of his armor and back in his school uniform. The meeting with the devils had been on his mind most of the day, to the point that he'd avoided his two friends when they tried to get him to go peeping with them. The ambush by the Ratman before the meeting had let him get some stress relief in, at least. Handing over the paperwork from Project Rat King had earned him improved relationships with both Sona and Riaz, while hearing the tales of his fight against the Ratman, and their breeder had upped his relationships with the rest. Snick's showing up again like a bad rash had been irritating, but at least it let him really take in exactly how outclassed he was by these devils. Any one of them could beat his ass 6 ways to Sunday without even breaking a sweat. Granted, a level was not an absolute indicator of someone's strength, but it could be used as a general measuring stick. Seeing that Riaz Gremory's peerage, as well as Sona Citri, had the power and stats to make those levels of theirs justified, put an end to any thoughts he might have nurtured about possibly being able to outfight them if they tried to capture him. Tojo Kaneko, the mascot of Kyoto Academy, had not only had a sword shatter off her skin like it was made of papier mache, but had then proceeded to punch the Ratman in the head so hard that it had been decapitated. Yuyudo Kiba, the prince of Kyoto Academy, moved so fast that Issei could barely see his afterimage, and he had a sacred gear that let him create swords. Demonic magic swords at that. The 3 scariest had been Hajime Akino, Riaz Gremory, and Sona Citri. Each possessed powerful magical abilities, and it was clear that they had deliberately chosen weak magical attacks to test the Ratman. Dual Thunder Call, Lesser Destruction Blast, and Rippling Water Blades were all less than tier 5, and they were clearly among the weakest spells that the 3 powerful female devils had at their disposal. They could wipe him out easily, especially Riaz Gremory. Seeing her use her power of destruction had sent fearful chills down his spine. That magic was dangerous. Still, he had been offended that Riaz was being forced to marry some jerk because her parents wanted it. Just what century were her parents in? Was the Devil Society really that backward? Helping them and preventing that was the least he could do. He had quietly asked Kiba that before leaving, and the answer was, sort of. Most of the devil population was up to date and modern, but the high-class devils, the so-called pillar families, were very up themselves and concerned the rising number of reincarnated and lesser devils compared to constantly shrinking number of pure-blooded devils. Thus, a law had been forced past the 4 Mao by most of the surviving family heads that negated the usual right of the heiress of a clan to refuse a marriage contract outright. So they would be married to other pure-blooded devils and making more of them, rather than marrying lesser devils. Or worse, reincarnated devils or other races. That sucked on so many levels that Issei didn't know what part of it disgusted him more. Fortunately, some of the more reasonable family heads had ensured that all heiresses were well within their rights to challenge their intended spouses for the right of refusal. In other words, if the heiress won, the engagement was dissolved. However, if they lost, the wedding was held immediately. The challenge was thus a double-edged sword. It sucked a lot. From everything that had been said, this razor guy made him, Motohama and Matsuda combined, look like chaste saints by comparison, and mixed it with an extremely unhealthy dose of rich douchebag. He sounded like a right jerk. Someone like Riaz Gremory, a beautiful girl who seemed to honestly care for her friends and comrades, deserved better than that. Still, there was only so much he could do. Helping her get the right spells and the right strategy was the best idea that he'd been able to come up with. Helping her and Akino learn the spells using the new feature he'd unlocked after using Revelation and fighting beside the devils, the tutorial system, had been a good idea as well. Using that, he could reduce the number of skill books he could learn from for 1 day by 1 and teach someone under the effects of his revelation ability up to 2 skill books. This meant that for today, he could only learn from 1 skill book. He had absorbed the Sword Talent skill book last night, which upped the amount of EXP his sword-related skills gained from being used by 10%, which stacked with his Learned Wisdom skills plus 20% boost. He decided to save the last use for today for one that he might acquire at the place he was heading to now. Stopping at the corner, Issei peered around it to see a large abandoned factory, which it was on the surface. In reality, it was the hidden location of Project Rat Poison, the counter to Project Rat King, which had been used to create the Ratman. If there was anywhere that Agent Flambridge was likely to be, it was this place. If not, he could perhaps get a clue or two about how to track the Ratmen to their new burrows. Whatever was in this place, it had to be dealt with, and soon. He could tell that the devils were getting nervous about these purifiers, and they might act before he could find out enough. Without the information and the maps he had though, they should have no idea where to look before he was actively fighting. Hopefully, that would give him the time he needed to ransack the place and find out everything he needed to know. Transforming into his combat outfit, he ghosted towards the gate, rusted and padlocked shut, and slashed it open with his gladius. Dungeon discovered. You have discovered the dungeon Ruins of Purity. You gain 400 EXP. Do you wish to enter this dungeon? Warning. Entering this dungeon whilst being 3 or more levels beneath the minimum level displayed is dangerous to your life. Why? Okay, quite why it gave that warning, even although he was only 1 below the recommended level, was bizarre. But whatever. He'd roll with it. Resolutely hitting the Y key, he advanced forwards, the gates swinging shut behind him with a metallic clang. Let's go. Regular speech. Opai. Thoughts. Boost. Sacred Gur. Drag speech. Chapter 11. Versus Humans. Occult Research Clubroom. QO Academy. Well, that went better than I was expecting. He was far more open than I'd hoped. Ria's Grammarium used as Aquino served her and Sona tea. Indeed, and we were able to learn from more than what I'd originally hoped. The Citri heiress agreed before taking a sip of her tea. Aquino really was talented at making black tea, with an almost equal talent for crafting the delicate sencha that was resting on a small plate nearby. I think mentioning your predicament helped get him to open up far more than he would have otherwise. It was a part of human nature. People tended to be more open and trusting toward people they were sympathetic for. A low blow some would call, but they were devils dealing with a complete unknown. Their morals were rather more flexible than a human's. The crimson-haired ruined princess scowled at the reminder of her fiancé before taking a sip of tea herself. Yes, I imagine it did. Before a positively devilish smirk crossed her lips. Besides, our new friend did provide some rather interesting ideas on how to deal with it, didn't he? Sona smirked. No fonder of the perverted rake than Riaz was. I suppose he did. Still, the encounter with him provided quite a few interesting points of data as well. The bespectacled devil added, adjusting her glasses thoughtfully. First off, that our red-armored friend is born and raised locally. He pointed out where he was attacked without even glancing in the direction, which implies a deep understanding of the local geography that only a local, or at least a long-term resident, would have. He's also about our age, based on his height, attitude, and speech patterns, plus the fact that the most common time for sacred gears to awaken is in the holder's teens, if they awaken at all. Sacred gears did not simply manifest before their holders at random. Either they were awoken in times of great need or at times when the wielder honestly and truly desired power from the very depths of their heart. An alternative method was when they were awakened as a result of the holder being reincarnated into a devil via the evil peace system. Adjuka Beelzebub liked to think ahead, as it was more than slightly possible that a human could be reincarnated as a devil without awakening their sacred gear, so he had added that function to his evil pieces. It was widely known that the Mao Beelzebub had placed numerous hidden systems into his masterwork, the evil peace system, and had left it up to the kings and other pieces to discover what they were. Several had been discovered and become common knowledge over the intervening decades and centuries, but there were still dozens of others that remained nothing more than rumor or speculation. Adjuka himself was remaining tight-lipped on the subject, never confirming or denying any rumor presented to him, and only confirming that there were still systems left that hadn't been discovered yet. The man seemed to view the research and experimentation that many young devils went through to uncover more of those secrets as both an important exercise in helping them learn to think and experiment, and as a thoroughly enjoyable form of entertainment. He really had a bad sense of humor. Sona, we're not trying to discover his identity as of yet, Riaz calmly reminded her friend. Besides, that still doesn't narrow things down by much. There are at least 3 other high schools in QO, each with at least 100 students our age. True, but we can keep an eye out for anyone lingering in the areas where the Ratman burrows used to be, Aquino said with a frown. I doubt he would bother with them. Sona shook her head. No Ratman there, so no need for him to go near the places anymore. True enough, the Priestess of Thunder conceded. A familiar sensation in the air made the 3 devils pause. Then Riaz sighed. Looks as if our friend is going after another location involving these purifiers that he neglected to mention to us, she stated, a small frown of annoyance crossing her lips. To be strictly accurate, we asked him to tell us about the purifiers in general, not specific locations where they were based. Sona reminded her. He seems determined that, as a human resident of this town with a sacred gear, it is up to him to deal with any human threats that pop up in QO that have anything to do with the supernatural world, aside from members of the church or the Gregory. That responsibility technically falls onto our shoulders instead of his, but I doubt he cares much at the moment. From what I've seen, he seems to take what the Purifiers are doing personally. No, Akino shook her head thoughtfully, tilting it slightly as she looked for the right words. More like he's outraged. Yes, he's outraged at what they're doing. What should we do, Bacho? Rias waved a hand in mild irritation, resignation on her face. Leave him for now. If he finds anything that he feels we need to know, he'll doubtless find a way of contacting us. He wants us to be hands-off in dealing with this particular matter. Fine, we'll be hands-off until he gets in over his head, and then we'll go in and save his rear, hopefully earning a bit more trust and goodwill in the process. We still should have given him a way of contacting us, Sona pointed out. This was an unexpected oversight on her part that she was currently mentally cursing. Akino, set your familiar to watch the shrine when you aren't there, Rias ordered without hesitation. That's where we designated a neutral location, so it's also the most likely place that he'll go to if he wants to contact us. Once he is seen, contact either Sona or me and we'll go see what it is that he wants. Hi, Bachu. The Yamato Nechiko nodded demurely. With Issei, the Sekyude was becoming puzzled and annoyed. He had been walking around this abandoned factory for over 15 minutes and there wasn't a single sign of it being used for anything since it closed its doors. The thick carpet of dust that covered every visible surface made that clear easily enough, and, combined with the corroded metal and broken glass littering the area, made the place look like it had been abandoned for over a decade. That was what made it so suspicious. This place had been built only 3 years ago and hadn't been in active use for more than 6 months before the company who ran it went bankrupt and went into administration. He distinctly remembered his mother talking about the scandal of the company's vice president having an affair with his secretary, as he embezzled funds from what was supposed to go to purchasing new materials. So then, the Purifiers had moved in some time after the place had shut down and had done something to make this place look like the place was one good push away from collapsing in order to keep people away. The base was almost certainly beneath the factory, otherwise it wouldn't be a dungeon. But how to get in there? It wasn't outside the building at least. There would be too much risk of some random vagrant either stumbling onto it or witnessing someone else coming out. So it had to be inside the building somewhere. So it was definitely inside, and likely hidden somewhere so it couldn't be found by some random kids that somehow managed to sneak past the fence. Hello, I haven't thought about Oppai in ages, Issei abruptly realized sadly. It wasn't that he was no longer interested in Oppai, far from it, but every time he did think about Oppai, he got excited. And once his excitement grew to a certain point, Gamer's mind would kick in and forcibly calm him down. It took all of the enjoyment out of thinking about the wondrous things called Oppai in the first place. Gamer's mind activated. See, bloody thing was leeching all the fun out of his life to keep him focused on his mission. Returning to the subject at hand, the Sekyude guessed that this place had some kind of emergency entrance, exit for the Project Rat poison base. That being the case, it was likely somewhere out of the way or hard to get to on the ground floor, which ruled out the main factory floor, as well as the ruined cafeteria and all of the corridors and public places. That left the floor manager's office. It was perched slightly above the floor to allow the theoretical manager to overlook the place, but it was also out of the way, and was small enough and unobtrusive enough to be overlooked by most people. For using a startling amount of logic and reasoning, you gain +1 wise and int. A vein pulsed in Issei's head as his right arm's sacred gear snarked at him once again. He never once imagined he'd have a near irresistible urge to punch an article of clothing. But then again his life had just been getting weirder and weirder since this started. Making his way to the floor manager's office, the boy peered around the dimly lit room. Old desk, broken hat stand, decrepit-looking chair, suspiciously clean and intact floor plan with several pins stuck in it mounted on the wall. Hello, Clue. Examining the pins made Issei smile beneath his helmet. All of them were blank, except for one, which had a dead rat with a spike through it engraved on it. Rat poison. Pressing it, Issei stepped back as the wall jutted and about a meter of floor and wall creaked open, revealing steps leading down into darkness. As always, Issei had to wonder why these places were never brightly lit. Were the Purifiers miserly with their electricity bills or something? Putting that inane question aside, Issei carefully went down the stairs, wishing he had bought a torch. Then he had an idea. Magic weapon reinforcement, he muttered. In a flash, both his gladius and his swordbreaker were wrapped in ruby light. While dim, the added light was more than enough to see by, even if the opening slammed shut behind him as he activated it. Moving down the stairs, Issei was not surprised to see an antechamber at the bottom of the stairs. That had been the commonality with all of the dungeons he had visited so far. What Issei hadn't expected was the still corpse of a man sprawled out in the middle of the small room, clutching something in his hand. His throat had been slit on both sides, one neater than the other. So someone slits this guy's throat once, hastily and messily, and then slits the other side in a neat and tidy way. Because why? The gamer thought in confusion. The clothes the guy was wearing were decidedly odd as well, bloodstains aside. They looked kind of like the robes you'd see on a monk, except this one was white and burnt orange, made of nylon rather than cotton or whatever material monks' robes were normally made from. Emblazoned over his heart was a symbol, a flame set on a shield. The words corpore et anima, semper pora semper vira, nunquam in Urium were written in Rama-G above and below it. ... Is that English or what? Issei muttered in confusion. His skill at reading English was so-so, but he wasn't recognizing any of this stuff. Unless the anima on the top line was talking about the Final Fantasy X summon. But he kinda doubted it. The hand that was clenched was rigid, but Issei didn't have over 100 STR for nothing, so the contents were quickly exhumed. It was a key. Issei blinked before using observe on it. Project Supervisor's Office Key. This is the key that allows entry into the Supervisor's Office of Project Rat Poison. Useful. Wait, so then this guy was ... who then? If he had the Supervisor's Office Key, then Issei supposed that he was, in fact, the head of Project Rat Poison. But, if so, why had he been killed? The wounds didn't have the greenish tinge of the warpstone blades that the Ratman assassins like to smear their blades in, so that just left one person. Agent Flambridge. He had to have done this. Quelling his fury, the Sekyude stored the key in his inventory, and then looted the man's body, leaving him his clothes out of respect for the dignity of the dead. Fortunately, the man had a map of the facility on him. The Project Rat Poison base wasn't actually large enough to need a map. It was about the size of 4 school gymnasiums sitting in a square, with 3 levels to it. The supervisor's office was just a few meters away on this floor, in fact, which actually explained why he still had his key in hand. He'd likely just left his office when he was killed. Flambridge discovered this guy was running and managed to catch up and kill him from wherever it was that he had been previously, supposing that this guy was in his office, in the short time it took him to leave and lock his office and run over here. Issei thought with a frown, unless the Purifier agent was just a few feet away from this guy's office when he started to run. That would be very difficult ... The boy examined the way that the body was sprawled, just feet from the door leading to the rest of the facility. The look of pain and realization told him that the man had been taken completely off guard. He was waiting in here for the project head to run in and slit his throat as he entered. He concluded grimly. But why? It made no sense. Killing the members of Project Rat King made sense, if a grisly, evil kind of sense. But the members of Project Rat Poison, the ones Flambridge had been ordered to rendezvous with. Deciding that the answer to all these questions lay within the base itself, Issei started forward again. Moving slowly, he left the antechamber behind and entered the main corridor, which, for some stupid reason, were a blindingly bright shade of white. What moron decided that eye-searing white was a good color for the walls, floors, and ceilings of a base? His eyes were actually watering behind his menpo, cursing the Purifiers for their stupid tastes in interior decorating. Issei made his way to the nearby office, trying to keep his eyes from focusing on the eye-searing color. It wasn't that far, just barely 4 meters or so. Obviously, the rear entrance was the project head's escape route. Opening the door with the key, the Sekyude entered the office and closed the door behind him, locking it again to prevent anyone from sneaking up on him afterwards. Then he turned his attention to the office itself, walking up to the desk. It was a basic office not too dissimilar to the office that the head of Project Rat King had possessed, except very modern and up-to-date, as opposed to run-down and second-hand like the other one had been. The desk looked brand new, the carpet was thick beneath his shoes, the lighting was tasteful, and the back wall was a glass window, looking out at the floor beneath, which was crawling with zombies. Wait, what? Issei gaped out of the window. No, he had not been seeing things. There were at least 10 zombies wandering around down there, all wearing Purifier uniforms, and all had a cut across the side of their throats, indicating how they had died. How the hell did they get raised as fucking zombies though? Issei groaned aloud. Out of all of the many games he had played over the years, the ones he had enjoyed least had been one like Silent Hill and Resident Evil. Sure, shooting zombies was fun and all, but did they have to make it so hard to save? Stupid recording tape. Anyway, this was going to be a pain. Zombies, if these ones were anything like the ones in films and games, were stupidly strong thanks to having no mental limiters on their muscles, and more modern depiction of zombies, like in the British film 28 Days Later, had them being rather swift on their feet to boot. Shaking his head to clear it of zombie-fueled apocalyptic nightmares, Issei returned his focus to what he's here for, investigating what was going on here, which had the newly added objective of finding out what the hell was causing the undead corpses on the floor below. Well, let's get down to a bit of burglary, Issei muttered, deactivating his magic and putting away his weapons. The door was solid and well built. If one of the shambling horde below tried to batter it down, he'd have plenty of time to draw them again before anything managed to break through. Breaking into the desk drawers was easy, as the keys were lying right there on top of the desk. A bunch of folders and files regarding Project Rat Poison in the large bottom drawer went into his inventory to be looked through later, and perhaps presented to the devils. In the smaller drawer, he paused as he beheld a rare sight in Japan, a firearm. It was a small one that he didn't recognize, so he used Observe on it. SeerKing Sig Pro SPC 2022. A semi-automatic pistol manufactured by SeerKing that fires 9x19mm parabellum rounds. This particular weapon has only been fired by the manufacturer and the gun shop that sold it. The grips on the frame are removable and can be replaced with others for various bonuses. Useless without bullets. Current grip, polymer. Deals piercing damage of 75 to any location a bullet strikes. 100% chance of critical hit if the head or any internal organs are struck by a bullet. Can be used as improvised close combat weapon, dealing bludgeoning damage. S+5. Magazine loaded. 15/15 bullets, not chambered. Wow, Issei blinked. That was pretty detailed, but there was something detached about the way Observe was describing the weapon before him, as if it found the gun distasteful to describe, so it gave the most clinical description it could. It made sense to Issei. Close combat weapons and magic had been around for thousands of years, while firearms were newfangled devices that his sacred gear apparently didn't trust or like. Gingerly picking up the gun, Issei placed it, and the 3 spare magazines, into his inventory. He might as well use it in this base, if nothing else. He had no desire to get near to a zombie if it was at all possible, making this weapon something he would use gladly if it meant keeping the walking dead things as distant as possible until he re-killed them. Don't look at him like that. No one in their right mind would want to get near a walking, rotting corpse. Not only was it damned unsanitary, but zombie bites were fucking one-hit KO. And then you rose up as a gross shambler yourself. He'd never get to fondle Oppai if he was a zombie. The hot schoolgirls would be even more interested in smashing his skull than they ever were before. High School of the Dead had some nice Oppai and great fanservice, but it was still freaky as hell. Examining the actual desk itself, Issei noticed a memo similar to the ones he'd seen in the Ratman burrows up until now. To the head of Project Rat Poison. The Rat King project has produced satisfactory results, but the chance that the specimens might revolt against us cannot be discounted, which is why we at Central Command created Project Rat Poison, with the express purpose of having a contingency plan for such an instance occurring. Ignore any directives and suggestions by the head of Project Rat King. Your purpose is to create a poison that can and will slay any and all Ratmen that it is exposed to it, while wasting the not inconsiderable amount of time, money and materials that we have invested into Project Rat King would be something of an inconvenience. The threat of a new supernatural race existing outside of our control, one that we created to boot, is not something we can countenance. Work hard, Mr. Cedo. Should the activation of your project prove necessary, an agent will reveal himself and identify himself as Flambridge. Take his appearance as clearance to activate your project as the final failsafe for the purity and sanctity of our souls. The memo was dated roughly 3 months previously. Issei looked at another sheet of paper, this time something that Seto Tetsuo had written himself. Why me? Where did it all go so wrong? I'm looking out at my facility and seeing the people that I work with being slaughtered by a man in a black cloak. Then they stagger to their feet, brought back by some form of foul sorcery. I don't know how they got in here, and I don't really care. Once I finish this memo, I am going to flee via the rear entrance, exit and then go underground for a while. Possibly go on holiday in the Bahamas. This is the main thrust of this letter. I quit. I have had it. Bad working conditions, I can handle. Poor pay, well it's better than what the government pays at least. The underground bases are helpful in that we do not get bothered by door-to-door salesmen. But a madman slaughtering my people and turning them into zombies is where I draw the bedamned line. I am out of this organization and I wish whoever has to pick up the pieces here the best of luck. They're going to need it. The former head of Project Rat Poison, Seto Tetsuo. This one was dated 3 days previously. roughly about as long as the man himself had been dead. Poor, stupid bastard had apparently decided to write a letter of resignation before running for his life. Issei had to respect his professionalism, if not his lack of survival instincts. The rest of the room was bare of anything either useful or interesting. Yes, the place certainly looked stylish, but that didn't mean that anything vital to project rat poison was kept in there. The only things like that had been in the bottom drawer, and they were now in his inventory. Similarly, the only useful things in the room had been the gun and its ammunition, also now stored in his inventory. After adding the 2 memos as an afterthought, Issei pulled out the facility map to scope out where he should go next. On this floor, there were the dormitories, a few offices, the kitchens and relaxation facilities. Nothing too serious, but best to be thorough in case he could find anything useful. On the next floor down were the labs where the staff experimented with chemicals and made the deadly poison that they planned on using on the Ratman. On the lowest floor was the ominously named Purification Chamber, presumably where the controls for the poisons were located. Issei really didn't want to go into the labs down there. He was not Gordon Freeman and he did not have a hazardous environment suit on. His armor was designed to be used against enemies and magic, not poison, and you could bet that somehow he'd have poison thrown at him. But, unfortunately, Issei was equally sure that he would be forced to go through the labs because the only way to the purification chamber was through one of the main labs. Oh joy. Wham. Someone ... or something slammed into the door leading into the office Issei was standing in, making it crack. A low and guttural moan from the other side of the door made it clear that it was not a particularly proactive door-to-door salesman either. Pulling the cig out of his inventory, the Sekyude very carefully pulled back the slide and chambered around before also drawing back the hammer and uneasily aiming the weapon at the door. His swords had felt much like this before he had gained a skill in using them. Uncomfortable, unbalanced, too light or too heavy. Hopefully it would be corrected if he got a skill with firearms. With another couple of powerful slams, the door splintered, split and cracked before a shambling zombie broke through, face faulting onto the floor after breaking through. If it wasn't for the fact that this was a very serious situation, Issei would be laughing his head off at the sight. Purifier Remnant LV-15, shambling dead. Not being one to look a gift horse in the mouth, Issei quickly took aim at the down undead skull and squeezed the trigger. Bang! Unlike in movies, a gun going off was loud. His aim was surprisingly spot on, as the bullet went right through the crown of the zombie's head, dropping it back to the ground like a puppet with cut strings. You have defeated a Purifier Remnant. You receive 400 EXP. You receive Rat Poison Memo. As a result of a specific action, you have acquired the skill Firearms Proficiency. Firearms Proficiency LV1.00. Since around 1250 AD, the use of gunpowder weaponry has grown and spread until it is the most commonly used military tool of the mundane world. From handguns and rifles to cannon and artillery, the number of weapons that have been made beggars belief. Although considered useless against any competent supernatural foe due to the development of numerous simple and easy-to-learn spells that render any form of black power or gunpowder within range useless, against the weakest of the supernatural world, a gun can be just the thing you need to level the playing field. Grants the user the ability to carry handguns with ease. Increase accuracy of all ranged attacks made with a handgun by 1. Increase damage of all ranged attacks made with a handgun by 1. So that's why the gamer's gear doesn't like me using guns, Issei remarked. Now what's that about memos? The Rat Poison memo turned out to be a part of a series of memos between the project head of Project Rat Poison and one of his scientists, Raka Nia. Nia, I believe you were specifically ordered not to make this poison as deadly as it could possibly be. We only want to kill the Ratman abominations, not the entire human population of QO. As it is, I am officially ordering you to scrap your work and start over from scratch. Make it deadly to the Ratman and easy to disperse inside their burrows, but I want it to be heavier than air. There will be no lighter than air poison gases made here, thank you very much. Seto Tetsuo. This Nia woman made a poison that deadly. Issei thought in disbelief. Okay, it's official, these guys got what was coming to them when they died. Though, I'll admit raising them again as undead might be a bit much though. Looting the body and getting 5,000 yen plus some snacks, Issei made his way back into the corridor that was too bright to look at. The first couple of rooms that he entered were lounges and had nothing of interest beyond possibly still edible biscuits in them. The first couple of offices were boring, having reams of paperwork about the minutiae of both the supplying and running the base or of the experiments conducted on the floor below. The latter was in such complicated scientific jargon that Issei felt his eyes crossing as he tried to read them. Those joined the rest of the paperwork he'd be handing the devils once this was over. Hopefully they had someone who could understand the sciencey mumbo-jumbo. In the third office though, he had to deal with 2 more Purifier remnants, which earned him the skill headshot, which was not simply a firearm skill, it could be applied to any projectile weapon, from a throwing knife to a crossbow. Headshot, simply put, added a percentage, which varied depending on the skill's level, to the chance to hitting the target's head with whatever projectile weapon Issei was using at the time, as well as granting additional damage depending on what the weapon was as well. A cool skill added to his repertoire. Issei continued on, adding rat poison memos to his inventory whenever he killed a zombie. It was easier to think of them like that. Dehumanizing them in his mind prevented him from having to use his gamer's mind to force himself into a calm state. Honestly, he didn't know if he could actually kill a human just like that. It was hard enough with zombies. After about 15 more minutes, Issei cleared out the first floor of the facility and gathered all 15 of the rat poison memos, which made the gamer's gear generate a keycard to allow access to the next floor down. I don't want to know how you got a hold of this, do I? Issei mused aloud as he alternated between eyeing his hand and the keycard. Much to his surprise, the gamer's gear manifested for a moment and flashed before vanishing again. Akahayi. Moving on, Issei decided, more proof, if that was needed, that something was inside his sacred gear, and that it was fond of making fun of him. All of the doors to the level below were made of clear glass for some stupid reason. It wasn't even bulletproof or reinforced glass, just the same kind of glass you'd get a screen door made out of. Why? Just why? They were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Shaking his head at the obvious sign that the Purifiers hadn't really considered the possibility of the place being invaded by an outside force, Issei inserted his keycard into the scanner, making the door slide soundlessly open. Even if he hadn't had the keycard, he was fairly certain that hitting the glass door with one of his swords would have shattered it easily, though that would have likely brought an entire horde of zombies and other unpleasant things down onto his head, so better not. Entering the atrium that was visible from the project manager's office window, Issei opened fire with the SIG, managing to eliminate 1 zombie from the get-go. Unfortunately, that also drew the attention of the other zombies. There were 9 of them left and they were all headed towards where Issei had fired the pistol. Swiftly relocating as silently as possible, the sacred gear user fired 3 more times, killing another zombie with a headshot and sending another one stumbling into the zombie next to it with a bullet to the shoulder. The last one missed though, which made Issei curse slightly. He had already used an entire magazine up on the previous floor, with only 2 3/4 magazines left. That left him with just under 45 bullets remaining and who knows how many zombies left to deal with. As they had been created, apparently, with some kind of magic dagger, Issei didn't know if they could infect people with bites or body fluids. But he did not want to take a chance. Ah well, where bullets failed, magic would prevail. As a precaution, Issei drew his blood metal gladius with his offhand, and was very thankful that he had acquired the ambidextrous skill as well. The 2 zombies that had collided were tearing into each other like animals. Leaving them to it, Issei fired at the 6 remaining zombies carefully, aiming using the iron sight and scoring 3 headshots. It was irritating that the only way to kill zombies was to either cut off their head or destroy the brain, like it said in Shaun of the Dead. But Issei persevered. Taking advantage of his distraction, one of the undead charged at Issei from the side. Evidently, they weren't entirely brain dead. Whoa, the boy yelped in shock, dodging the flailing arms of the zombie before reflexively lashing out with his sword, smashing the zombie's head back and making it stumble backwards long enough for him to bring the gun around to put a bullet in it to finish it off. After that, it was fairly easy to kill the remaining zombies, as 2 were attacking one another and the remaining 3 were on the far side of the atrium, shuffling towards him at a crawl. Thankfully, they were classic Romero zombies rather than the 28 days variety, thus a slow, shambling walk was their top speed. The last 3 may as well have had bullseyes painted on their foreheads, while dealing with the 2 scrambling zombies was like shooting fish in a barrel. You have defeated Purifier Remnants X10. You receive 4000 EXP. Firearms proficiency has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Headshot has leveled up. LV1 LV2. As a result of repeated actions, the skill aim has been created. Aim LV1.00, one of the more basic skills available when using any projectile weapon. Aiming carefully before firing. Throwing generally leads to fulfilling the purpose of firing. Throwing the weapon in the first place, i.e., actually hitting the target. Once activated, lasts 2 minutes or until you either switch targets or your target dies. Increases accuracy of all projectile weaponry by 1 when active. Increases likelihood of hitting a vulnerable point by 1% when active. increases headshot damage by a further 1 when active. Useful. Although yet again, Issei got the feeling that his sacred gear was snarking at him with that description. Pressing the auto loot button got him everything he could have taken from them aside from their clothes, so he decided to explore the level. The first place he looked was the security station, which was a little room barely larger than a kitchenette. It had security logs that might prove interesting viewing, but Issei paid more attention to a notice on the wall for the moment. Official Purifier Military Forces Specialties. Know where you can go. Flint's Internal Security Troopers. This is where you all are right now. Equipped with truncheons and stun guns. Sparks. Low-ranking troops, specializing in mundane infiltration and investigation. Typically equipped with shock batons and/or tasers. Flames. Standard troops armed with modern military weapons. The bulk of the armed might of the Purifiers. Cleansers. Elite shock troopers wearing powerful magic armor. They are also equipped with flamers. Judges. Internal code enforcement troops. When someone goes rogue, they are dispatched to neutralize the problem. Agents. Hidden, unknown people who act as the eyes and ears of Central Command. They could be anyone, even the guy you eat with in the cafeteria. Issei's left eye twitched. Flamers. Modern weaponry. Magic armor. Ignoring the magic armor, how the hell have the Purifiers gotten any amount of military ordnance through customs? Even I know that sort of thing is closely monitored by the government. Just what kind of influence or connections do these Purifiers have? The magic armor was much less of a surprise for Issei than the military weaponry. He had figured out quite some time back that the Purifiers were a bunch of hypocrites when it came to magic. They claimed to hate it, but used it when they needed to, warpstone being the most obvious use of it. The evil green crystals almost had to be made via some kind of magic. There was certainly nothing natural about it. Taking down the flyer and storing it in his inventory, Issei looked for some kind of roster to tell him exactly how many security people had been assigned to this place. None of the zombies he had killed so far had been dressed differently, so they were likely the scientists. After a moment, he found the roster he was looking for. According to the sheet of paper, there were 10 flints assigned to this base, so where were they? Issei had killed 25 zombies already since coming to this facility, and he very much doubted that there was more than double that amount in total due to the relatively small size of the base. The most heavily armored door in the facility was likely the one leading to the 3rd floor and the purification room. If any of the staff managed to escape the man in the black cloak, who was almost certainly Flamberge, that was probably where they were hiding. That said, Issei sat down and rewound the security footage so he could get a grasp of exactly what the hell had happened in this place. There were 9 security cameras that this little cubicle recorded footage from: the 3 dorms, the entrance to the purification room, the corridor outside the project head's office, the main lab, the head scientist's office, the cafeteria, and the corridor leading to the main entrance. All of them were synced to the same time, which was displayed on the bottom left of each screen, along with the date. At 6 o'clock at night 3 days previously, a figure wearing black had entered the base via the main entrance, had drawn a knife that had a wavy blade similar to one edge of his rapscallion wave blade, and had proceeded to hunt down and kill every person in the base that he could get at. 3 flints had fled from the base while he was occupied with the scientists in the lab, while the other 7 had retreated into the purification room along with the head scientist, Rakania. Then the black-clad man had drawn an ordinary dagger and made his way to the back entrance, where Sito Tetsuo shortly ran to, meeting his fate there. Then the man in black simply sauntered out of the base with nothing resembling care for what he had just done, dodging the freshly risen zombies with an ease that Issei knew that he couldn't match himself. The movements were sharp, precise, and wasted no movement whatsoever. He hadn't moved quickly, he had seen the zombies, predicted their movements, and then moved just in time to avoid them. Absolute economy of movement, something Issei had only seen in the anime, and manga Rurouni Kenshin ... Just who was this guy? Setting that aside, Issei took a copy of the surveillance footage. If the devils had any knowledge about this thing, he'd need it. After that, Issei basically ransacked the small security station for everything he could stuff into his inventory: bulletproof vests, riot helmets, stun guns, truncheons, and tasers. Hey, never leave an enemy stronghold standing, and never leave weapons for the enemy to collect later. Although the Sekiryude doubted that the collection of gear he had stolen would do more than very mildly inconvenience the Purifiers, every little bit helps. Now then ... back to zombie killing. Issei sighed. Not only were zombies an awkward target to kill because of their origins as humans, they stunk to the high heavens as well. It was only because he was used to bad smells from the Ratman breeder's burrow that he hadn't thrown up already. There were 4 labs in Project Rat Poison, each one twice the size of a high school classroom. Each was filled with complicated science stuff that Issei had no clue about, and each had 5 zombies in them. Issei methodically went through each one, shooting the zombies and gathering notes from their research and development. He also disposed of any actual poisons via the biological waste disposal chutes that, according to one flyer, led down to a furnace. No way was he leaving anything for the Purifiers to use when they came to investigate this place. Just as he dealt with the last zombie, the door leading down to the purification room slammed open and 8 people emerged. 7 of them were dressed in white uniforms with slate gray caps on their heads. Obviously the Flints. The other one was an angry woman who was very attractive, albeit flat-chested to the point that Sona Citri was bigger than she was, and had a furious expression on her face. "You, what the hell have you done to my research?" she shouted. "Head scientist Rakania, I presume." Issei drawled. "Isn't it obvious? I've been laying your former co-workers to rest and destroying all of your poison. Also, I've killed all the Ratmen in the burrows, so your project is no longer needed." "Phew," the woman seethed. "Take him into custody. Be as rough as you like." Responding to her orders, the Flints drew their truncheons and started to advance on Issei. Looking at the gun in his hand, Issei decided that it was overkill for who he was facing. Purifier Flint LV-16, Foot Soldier of the Pure, Rakania LV-17, Head Scientist of Project Rat Poison. While they had levels just one below his, a casual use of Observe on them revealed that their physical stats were little more than a quarter of his own at best. Nia's stats were pure garbage, except for her mental ones, 10 or so higher than his own. They had about as much chance at beating him as he stood against the 2 devil heiresses, unless they had an exceptional run of good luck. With a smirk hidden by his menpo, Issei tossed the gun to one side. "Giving up," Raka sneered as the SIG clattered onto a table. "No, just changing to something that suits the level of combatants I am facing," the armored boy stated as he reached into his inventory and pulled out a pair of truncheons of his own. Side handle truncheon, a mass-produced baton made of solid oak, with an added handle on the side of it. Used by law enforcement and private security as the close combat weapon of choice for hundreds of years, the design is tried and tested. Anyone on the receiving end of this weapon will feel the pain. Durability 50/50, deals S+15 bludgeoning damage. While not exactly as good as, say, his Blood Metal Gladius, they were good enough to deal with these idiots. Holding one in each hand, Issei rolled one shoulder, then the other, before saying 2 words as he looked at the surprised Flints. "Bring it." Raka Nia's perspective. It was one-sided beat down, just not in the way Nia had been expecting. Raka Nia gaped as the red-armored figure, who was almost certainly one of those supernatural freaks, waded into combat with the Flints who had taken refuge in the purification room with her for the last 3 days. Thankfully, the 3rd floor of the facility was almost entirely self-contained and possessed a bathroom and food and water supplies. It had been designed as both as an emergency bunker in case someone invaded the place for whatever reason and as a fallout shelter in case of a serious lab accident. Anyone on the upper floors would flee through the factory exit, which was airtight, while those on the lower floors would seal themselves in the purification room and either wait for the emergency protocols to clear the labs, the distress beacon to call in a cleanup crew, or the danger to pass naturally. None of them had wanted to deal with zombie remnants of their former co-workers, particularly since their weapons would likely be ineffective against an undead enemy, so they'd sat tight and waited for the beacon to bring in a cleansing team. Instead, the red-armored freak had shown up. The choices were to either try to wait him out as well, or try and deal with him themselves. They'd apparently made the wrong decision. The first 2 Flints charged in and received a truncheon to the abdomen each as a reward. As they slumped down, clutching their stomachs and wheezing, the freak hit each of them on the back of the head, knocking them out like lights. Then he went of the offensive, wielding his batons like swords and beating down the next 3 Flints to attack him with almost contemptible ease. One Flint even being sent flying into the wall 3 meters away by one careless blow. "Retreat," Raka squeaked, backpedaling with almost indecent haste. "He's a freak. A real freak." Before she made it more than 3 steps, the last 2 Flints were beaten unconscious and the red armor man was looming at her. Not over her, because they were about the same height, but looming at her. His very presence was intimidating. "Had enough yet, fanatic?" he asked in that bland, inflectionless voice of his. Nia's eyes rolled back into her head as she fainted from terror, pissing herself as she did so. "Gross," was the last thing she heard before blackness took her. Back with Issei. Issei looked down blankly at the scientist, who had just pissed herself, fainted and was now sprawled on the ground like a puppet with its strings cut. "Gross," he deadpanned. Evidently, Raka Nia was very much one of those people who talk the talk, but couldn't walk the walk. One of those people who could throw insults and threats out like confetti, but folded like a wet tissue when actually confronted. A coward, in other words. Well, too bad for her, the Seirkyude thought with a snort. Not wanting to touch the woman, not after she pissed herself, Issei opened up the gamer's store and utilized some of his newly gained loot to purchase several lengths of rope and a new spell, Rope Binding Prison. Rope Binding Prison LV 1.00. A tricky spell first developed in the Middle East. This modern version allows the user to bind targets with rope. If the rope is conjured, it is temporary and fairly easy to break. If the ropes are in the area, or in your inventory, the cost is severely reduced. But the prison is still easy to break for a supernatural of modest power. If the target are conscious and mobile, then there is a chance for them to resist and thus mitigate the effects of the prison. MP cost 30. Range 5 meters. Number of targets 1. Optional requirement to cast. Length of rope long enough to bind target, either in surrounding area or in inventory. If cast without rope, conjures rope enough to bind the arms and legs of the target. The rope binds the target and lasts for 3 minutes. If cast with rope, the rope is sent at the target from the surroundings, or, if the rope is in your inventory, via a small portal leading to your inventory. The target is bound without limit, aside from the durability of the rope itself and the target's ability to wriggle out of the ropes, cut them or otherwise undo the knots and remove them from their person. If the target is mobile and conscious, there is a 50% chance of them resisting the binding, with a further 75% chance of them keeping one or more limb free of the binding. A very useful little spell. Even if the main purpose of the spell was a flop, it would at least momentarily distract and restrict any enemy that Issei targeted with it. Well, any that weren't strong enough to snap rope like twine. Anyway, he hadn't come across many that could do that, aside from the rat ogres, that is. Possibly Viral Warfing as well. But that one was definitely in the maybe pile. Rope Binding Prison, he muttered, pointing a truncheon each at 2 flints. Much to his surprise, 2 holes opened in mid-air and shot lengths of rope out. They wound around the arms and tied off, severing themselves somehow before moving to the ankles and tying them up too. Once the legs were securely tied, the ropes were cut off again and retreated back into the portals before the little apertures into his inventory closed themselves up as if they had never been there. As a result of a specific action, the skill dual casting has been created. Dual casting LV 1.00. Most of the time, you cast a single spell at a time. Well, with this skill, you can now cast the same spell twice at the same time. It starts off weakening the spell you choose to cast twice by about half if it creates something, such as fireballs, barriers, healing effects, etc., as well as tripling the cost of the spell in question. The best way to improve this skill: practice, and, you guessed it, practice. MP cost: triple the cost of the spell you intend to double cast. The damage, durability and duration of any spell cast in conjunction with this skill has their effects halved. Okay. So that's a thing. Issei could see that it might be useful once he had it up to a decent level, but for the moment, it was fairly useless aside from with a spell that did something which wasn't limited by damage, duration, or durability. Such as one version of Rope Binding Prison, for example. Hastily binding the others with his new spell, Issei then turned to the notifications he had been ignoring since the fight had ended. You have defeated Purifier Flint's X7. You gain 420 EXP. You have terrified Rakania into unconsciousness. You gain 150 EXP. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Basic Club Proficiency has been created. Basic Club Proficiency LV 1.00. Since the dawn of man, the weapon most used by man, after their bodies themselves, has been blunt objects. Starting with humble rocks, this evolved into crude clubs made from tree branches and proceeded from there. Any blunt instrument that lacks a point or edge can be called a club and thus falls under this skill's aegis. Even some spiked weapons, such as flails and morning stars, are classed as clubs as well. Grants the user the ability to carry a club with ease. Passively increases bludgeoning attacks by 1. Passively increases chance of the stun status effect being dealt by 1%. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Non-Lethal Takedown Mode has been created. Non-Lethal Takedown Mode LV 1.00. When fighting, the usual way forward is to kill the enemy. Sometimes, however, that is not the best way, merely the easiest. When you need to defeat someone without killing them, this skill will be most useful. Passively increases the chance of knocking out enemies when you attempt to do so by 1%. When active, it will be almost impossible to kill your enemies. Your strikes with swords will automatically be using the flat of the blade and any blunt force weapons will aim to disarm. disable and knock out at any given opportunity. Both of the new skills were pretty useful, with the Club Mastery one being more so in Issei's opinion. He had been meaning to branch out his skills a bit in regards to his weaponry, so getting 2 more weapons skills in one day was pretty good. While he could get them very easily by purchasing the skill books from the gamer's store, Issei preferred earning the skills by wielding them in combat. It just felt more right that way. He didn't know how to explain it. Now then let's get to the last floor, he muttered once he had checked all of the knots were secure and that he had thoroughly looted all of the flints and Nia to make sure they had nothing with which to cut themselves out of their bonds with. The door leading to the purification room was covered in scratches and dents, indicating that someone, probably the zombies, had been trying to get into the room for a while before losing interest and wandering off. Stepping through the door, Issei wrinkled his nose as the scent of people living in an enclosed space for a few days assailed his nose. Wait a minute. The 3rd floor is supposed to be big, right? So why were those 8 idiots all living in this small room? Issei wondered as he eyed the room he was now in. There were bunk beds in one wall, along with an open toilet on the other side. Cupboards which presumably held food and water were in the middle of the room. On the opposite end of the room to the door was a chair with a console in front of it, and a large window looking down into something. There were no other exits from this room. Walking over to the console, Issei noted that one side had CCTV screens that covered even more of the facility than the security station on the previous floor. So this room really was intended as a fortress of some kind. Understandable really, the door was at least a foot thick and this place, if only 1 or 2 people were trapped in here, could live for maybe a couple of weeks before things became troublesome for them. Hello. What's this? Issei peered out of the window at a large cylindrical container standing in the middle of the room outside of the control room. Several thick tubes connected to it that were marked either intake or outtake respectively. It looked oddly familiar for some reason. Glancing at the console, he almost faceplanted when he saw that it was called the neurotoxin generator, and that it was full to the brim with poisonous gas. Seriously, these purifiers were seriously stealing all of Valve's ideas. First Half-Life and now Portal 2. Apologize to Valve, you damned, thieving fanatics, the Sekiryude thought angrily. He liked those games, damn it, and didn't approve a bunch of lunatic cultists stealing from them. Sighing to release the tension, Issei examined the controls. From what he could see, this thing was basically set up to pump the neurotoxin into the Ratman burrows at the push of the big red button there in the center. There did not, much to Issei's irritation, seem to be any way to drain or otherwise get rid of the toxin aside from pumping it into the burrows. As he trusted Rakania about as far as he could have thrown a tank back before he got the boosted gear and gaming gear, he severely doubted that the stuff in the tank was any degree less lethal than it had been when Sito-san had admonished her, so there was no way he was going to let the stuff out into the burrows. Issei smirked as he found a lovely little loophole in the way that the system was set up. He couldn't deliberately dump the gas for no reason, sure, but he could whip up a batch of some other kind of gas and pump it into the tank, which would have the stuff currently in the tank pumped into something. Issei wasn't sure if it was a furnace or a storage tank of some kind. Whichever it was, he was certain that it was a better alternative to having neurotoxin pumped into the burrows and possibly getting loose in Kyo Town. Unfortunately, chemistry was not something that Issei was all that interested in. He knew the common gases, plus a few others, but he had little knowledge on what might possibly be non-lethal. Just about the only thing that might be good would be nitrous oxide, or laughing gas. If too much was inhaled, he recalled from something a dentist had told him once, it could cause mental and physical problems. Also, it was a liquidized gas when used by dentists anyway, so it could have an effect if it was somehow splattered on skin or the eyes. Plus, if inhaled without oxygen, it could cause heart attacks. Issei had to use something that could, potentially, cause death, as he remembered very well what had happened to the neurotoxin generator had reached dangerously non-lethal levels in Portal 2. The damned thing had imploded. He had no desire to have this base blow up around him. Thank you very much. Carefully, the boy entered commands to create the new mixture of gas and pump it into the main tank. A bizizete noise blarted at him from the console. Error. Insufficient amount of oxygen available. Do you wish to break down the contents of the main tank to free up oxygen in order to make this mix? Why, even better, Issei thought gleefully. He had been nervous about what to do about the so-called rat poison formula that was currently in existence. Leaving it around had been asking for trouble, so this was a relief. Also, now that he had flicked through the menus on the console thoroughly, he found that he could simply destroy the stores of chemicals that this facility had in the next room. That way, even if the Purifiers did come back and discover that he had pulled a switcheroo, they have to bring in more chemicals to replace what he had destroyed. Win-win. Smashing down on the Y key on the console, he watched and listened in satisfaction as the pumps whirred to life and the deadly concoction in the tanks was removed. The tank was filled with water, and then the water was sent straight to a furnace. Was that safe? Probably not. As the laughing gas was pumped into the generator, Issei waited until the screen showed that the tank was full, before disposing of every other chemical in the next room. There, no more murderous gases would be made here, at least for the time being. Locking the plastic flap that the big red button had over it down was troublesome, but Issei discovered some useful plastic glue in a nearby storage cupboard, so he used that. He really was enjoying laying traps to frustrate his enemies, to be a fly on the wall when they tried to use the place. Job done. Issei went back upstairs and came across 7 dead flints and a missing Nia. All of the flints had been strangled, thin metal wires still wrapped around their necks. Immediately, Issei charged towards the main entrance, exit of the facility. Why, you might wonder. The reason was simple. In no dungeon that he had entered thus far had he ever come out the same way that he had gone in. A simple bit of deduction told him that it was probably the black-cloaked man who had killed the flints and kidnapped Nia. Other than the Purifiers, he was the only other person who knew of this place, and the Purifiers wouldn't kill their own men. Probably. Approaching the glass door barring his way to the first floor, Issei didn't hesitate to clench his armored fist, draw back his arm, fill it with MP and punch through the sealed door as soon as he spotted the destroyed and sparking card reading device. The door not only shattered, it exploded out from his fist, peppering the eye-searing white hallway with bits of glass. Ignoring that, as well as the pop-up that followed his action, Issei charged down the hallway, following the signs towards the main entrance to the facility, which was on the opposite side of the underground base to the rear entrance which Issei had used. It led to a long hallway that the Sekyude had barely glanced down during his dezombification of the first floor of the base. It was covered with silvery metal that was probably steel. Probably. Right now, Issei tore down the long hallway with all the strength of his stats, which wasn't inconsiderable. As he ran, the boy heard a loud bang sounding like a fist striking metal. Shit. What the hell is going on? You shitty piece of crap door. A man shouted, his voice echoing down the tunnel. Fucking useless piece of shit. As Issei rounded the only corner in the tunnel, he skidded to a halt as he beheld the circular door that presumably led to the way out shut tight, while Nia, still tied up, now gagged and looking somewhat terrified, sprawled on the ground while a figure with a black cloak and hood covering him stood in front of the door, seemingly glaring at the door as if that would mysteriously cause it to open. Hearing Issei arrive, the figure swung around and stared at him. The body type encapsulated by the cape was surprisingly slim and made the figure look androgynous in the form-concealing garment. Their face was hidden by a plain black full-face mask that was featureless except for a pair of glowing eyes. "Who the fuck are you?" the man demanded roughly. Now that Issei thought about it though, without the distortion caused by the tunnel, it sounded less real and more like a voice changer. Akatsu LV-17. Agent Flamberge. I'm the one who killed the Ratman. Agent Flamberge, Issei said tightly, although he didn't understand why there was only one name above the man's title. That title in and of itself was reason enough to make him ignore the wrongness of his actual name. The man jerked slightly at the name. A direct hit, by the looks of things. Huh, so you killed those little shitstains. So what? The cloaked figure scoffed. Nothing. I would be more concerned by my reaction to what you did to the personnel of the Ratman Breeder's Burrow, as well as this place. The Sekyude answered mildly. Removing idiots from the genipool should be rewarded, not punished. Flamberge sneered contemptuously. Considering you're a purifier as well, you're hitting yourself upside the head with that statement as well. Issei pointed out. This, for some reason, made Flamberge laugh uproariously, as if she found what Issei was saying hilarious. A purifier ... You mean me? The figure chortled. Oh child, perish the thought. I am more than human. In a flash of light, the cloak vanished, replaced by a tall, statuesque woman wearing a black dress, with long purple hair ... and a pair of large black feathered wings sprouting from her back. I am fallen, she declared arrogantly. Armaros the Lesser LV-34. Cursed one of God, Agent Flamberge, Cockabeel's faction of the Grigori. Oh ... shit. Chapter 12, Breaking the Flamberge. Issei was unfortunately quite familiar when it came to being confronted by powerful females. The almost daily beatings he'd received from Kades and Murayama made up the majority of these instances before he'd been awakened to the supernatural. The change in his life had only led to an upturn in those kinds of confrontations, his encounters with an increasingly irked Riaz Gremory, and Sona Citri making up the most prominent of those instances, which were thankfully non-violent. For some reason, Murayama at least looked somewhat wistful about his lack of peeping on them whenever he'd caught sight of her these days, almost as if she missed him peeping on the girls' kendo club for whatever reason. Girls are so weird. Anyway, with all this in mind, the fact that Issei was actually fairly calm when he was confronted with Flambridge's revelation that she was actually a fallen angel of not inconsiderable power. Gamer's mind didn't even need to activate immediately after the revelation. Instead, he instinctively activated Observe to get a better idea of what he was facing. Name, Armaros the Lesser. Class, Title, Cursed One of God, Agent Flambridge, Cockabeel's Faction of the Grigori. Level, 34. HP, MP, STR, STA, Dex, INT, Wise, Luck, Cha, LD. Armaros the Lesser is a relatively young, low-level fallen angel named in honor of one of the fallen Cotter of the same name. Hence her designation as the Lesser. Resenting her epithet, she has striven to prove herself useful to Cockabeel and earn recognition for her own merits and actions. Vicious, ruthless, and utterly contemptuous of beings other than fallen, she has made a name for herself as a powerful member of the Angel of the Stars faction. It was at this point that Issei had to have his sacred gear enforce calm on him. Gamer's mind activated. Well, I am impressed that a lowly human has managed to come this far. As pathetic as they were, the Ratmen were still creatures born of the hidden world. One of the Father's greatest mistakes should have easily been overwhelmed by them. The Fallen sneered, staring down at Issei with an expression of utter superiority and contempt. The dress she was wearing resembled a mix between a Chinese kipao married with the puffy shoulders and large, draping sleeves of a Western ball gown. When combined with the high heels she was wearing, Issei had to wonder how well she'd fight on the ground. Before resisting the urge to slap himself for his stupidity, she had a pair of giant wings emerging from her back, meaning she could fly. He very much doubted that the being in front of him was ever concerned with having to fight while standing on the earth. I do try my best to surpass people's expectations, he replied dryly. Is there any reason you're absconding with this idiot? He jerked his helmet at the bound Rakania. As utterly pathetic and craven as she is, her ability to concoct poisons is respectable ... for a human. Armaros answered absently, casting a contemptuous look toward the quivering form of her captive. She can be put to work for a cause greater than her own life. At least she'll be useful ... for a time. As much as having her atoning for her crimes is something I'd quite enjoy seeing, I'd prefer it if she wasn't put to work making more instruments of mass murder. Issei said darkly, I'm afraid that I'm going to have to ask you to leave her where she is. My, aren't we the polite bit of trash? The winged woman scoffed. She reached out with one hand and a spear of green light appeared just in time for her to grab it. There is only one choice left for rubbish like you. Human ... you can either die quickly or have it drawn out. With that, she spun the weapon of light around and hurled it at Issei. He quickly responded by throwing himself to one side, simultaneously drawing his swords out of his inventory and charging at the surprised Fallen. You dodged my spear. Armaros snapped out in shock, even as she manifested a pair of swords out of light and blocked Issei's dual strike. She pushed him back, but Issei gave ground only slowly. Gritting her teeth, the Fallen growled in frustration. This strength, no human should be able to match me in strength or dodge my blade. What sort of beast are you? 100% human, present and accounted for. Issei snarled back as he continued to push against her blades with his own, before launching a kick at her knee. He grunted slightly as his foot managed to impact. It felt like he'd just tried to kick one of those old leather soccer balls they'd used in the 50s. Even so, she clearly felt it, which seemed to surprise her even more. She stumbled back, but still managed to parry his follow-up slash. Despite her impractical choice in clothing, this Fallen obviously had at least some skill with a blade. Regaining her balance, Armaros let out a shriek of pure fury. In an instant she had manifested a new light spear over either of her shoulders and sent them flying at Issei from almost point-blank range. The only way to dodge was to retreat, so that was what he did, the spears smashing into the ground and burning through where he had been standing with frightening ease. The next instant, the fallen angel had launched herself at him like a missile with a single flap of her wings. Her shoulder slammed into him like a fucking truck and sent him flying head over heels back down the tunnel. Issei only avoided slamming against the wall by managing to stab his gladius into the ground and holding on for dear life, the blade forming a sharp crevice in the ground as it was dragged along with him. Like he was in a movie, Issei gradually came to a halt and managed to shakily land on his feet. You've lost 70 HP. Damage was reduced by half due to the activation of indomitability. Thank you, Gaming Gear, for stating the blatantly obvious. Looking up, the gamer spotted Armaros cut the door leading out open using her sword, with about as much difficulty as his mother had at cutting cheese with a kitchen knife, before grabbing at Nia. Quickly, he pointed his gladius at her and used his newest spell, Rope Binding Prison. He shouted. Small portals opened up around Armaros the Lesser and lengths of rope shot out, entangling her limbs as quickly as the spell allowed. What pathetic cantrip is this? The fallen angel roared as she fought against her bindings. The SeerKing used this time to run forwards, grab the Purifier scientist and start to book it back down the tunnel. Nia, evidently deciding that being in the hands of a fellow human was better than being a slave to a fallen, didn't struggle much. Heading back to the third floor of the base, Issei threw Nia into the room where she had previously been holed up in and slammed the door shut. Nothing was getting in there in a hurry. With another furious shriek that reminded Issei far too much of a raptor's hunting cry, Armaros smashed through the walls of the Purifier base as if they were balsa wood, a spear of light in her hand aimed right at Issei as he turned to face her. Now that I don't have to worry about killing the witness. Flame spear, Issei shouted, sending a spear of flame bursting from his outstretched sword and directly toward the flying woman. Enough with the low-level tricks, Armaros screamed, smashing through the attack with a single swipe of her own light weapon, which left her open to the spell Issei had thrown immediately after Flame Spear. Have a taste of burning balm. The gamer smirked behind his menpo as the ball detonated right underneath the fallen, engulfing her in a fireball. He didn't drop his guard at that either, quickly firing a barrage of fireballs into the fire and smoke to add to the destruction. He doubted they would do that much damage. If it was this easy to kill a fallen, even one with only 2 wings, then he very much doubted that someone with such an arrogant attitude would have survived as long as she had. Impudence. The target of his spells shrieked, blasting the fire away from her with an explosion of light erupting from her very skin. Her dress had received quite a bit of damage, with several holes and scorch marks now decorating it, and one of the sleeves had either been torn off or had simply fallen off after being severed. As far as wounds, all she had were a couple of minor burns here and there. Talk about tough. Hugh. Armaros seethed as she glared down at him. If looks could kill, Issei would likely have been reduced to smudge on the floor in an instant. You lowly piece of trash ... You dare to actually harm me. You dare to ruin my clothes. I am going to flay your skin from your bloody carcass and use it to sew a new dress. Wow, angry much. I can't help but get the feeling that ruining your extremely odd choice in clothing is actually the greater of the 2 offenses in your eyes. Issei drawled out, doing his best to appear unfazed. I made these clothes myself, you peon. The fallen angel snarled. That makes sense. Issei nodded subconsciously. Having your own work ruined does suck ... Like that time Matsuda had overwritten his save files for Legend of Dragoon with We Love Katamari. It had taken him quite some time to forgive his friend for that. Don't look at him like that. Legend of Dragoon was a classic. Wordlessly, the 2 combatants squared off with one another and started to plan their respective assaults in their minds. Issei knew that she would be ready for his fire spells by this point, and he doubted that his rope-binding prison would be able to slow her for more than a few seconds with the way she was wielding those light blades. All of that aside, fighting her at range was stupid. She had the ability to create and fire spears of capital L light without needing words or gestures, and she was able to telekinetically control them too. Add into that her presumably greater experience at fighting, and Issei knew that he would be cut to ribbons if he tried to duke it out with her at range. So then, close range, where he'd already proven that he was at least close to matching her physically, was his best option. Almost as if someone had rang a bell to start the next round, both Issei and Armaros made their moves at the same time. The SeerKing charged forwards, ready to dodge and block any spears sent at him. Armaros ... flew back and into the large atrium, heading up to the ceiling. Oh ... shit. Issei stared up at the sheer number of light spears that Armaros had arrayed around her. There had to be well over 24 of them. Judging from the look of strain on her face, this was around about her limit. Die, she ground out and sent the deadly weapons right at him. Lesser barrier shield. Issei commanded time, seemingly slowing down around him as he manipulated his mana as quickly as possible, utilizing his newly acquired dual casting skill before using it again, layering the 4 shields over each other. He then used Unified Shield 3 times, first merging the 4 shields into 2 and then the 2 shields into 1. It was an application that he'd thought up on the fly just now, but if the shields retained the bonus durability that the skill granted them even after being merged again. The spears rained down on Issei's defensive bulwark. Several missed him completely and slammed into the concrete floor and the zombie corpses lying upon them. ripping through chunks of stone and utterly disintegrating the corpses with ease. The rest fell square on Issei's doubly reinforced shield. The first several cracked the outer rim, the next few spread the weakness to the rest of the shield. The last 5 reduced the last fragments of durability from it, shattering the shield to pieces, with the spears going through it and aimed right at Issei. Force reduction field, bronze skin. Issei had already started casting even as his barrier began to give way, and feeling his MP coming close to tanking out at the activation of those 2 skills, he grabbed one of his few remaining MP potions from his inventory and crushed it in one hand. As he hoped, the effect was exactly the same as if he had drunk it, giving him enough MP to hold the spells for just a bit longer. Then the spears were upon him. Although slowed down slightly by his force reduction field, they were still blindingly fast. He was lucky enough to avoid 2 by moving back a step, but the others struck him squarely in the chest. Gah! Issei choked out as he was thrown back, skidding several feet. It felt as if he'd just been kicked by a horse. You have lost 265 HP. Crap on a stick. That's the most HP I've lost at once, ever. Issei winced as he pressed a hand to his cuirass. There were dents where it had been struck, but it was still in serviceable condition. Armaros was staring at him hard. That armor ... it's more than a disguise, she said in sudden realization. It was forged with magic. Only an idiot would confront a fallen while wearing regular steel. Issei informed her tartly. Now it's my turn. Earth shot. The sudden appearance of a large missile made of rock aimed right at her didn't shock the fallen too much. She simply summoned a curved sword of light and smashed it into gravel. As she did that, however, Issei was charging at her. He didn't have a hope in hell of beating her. That was what conventional logic told him. She was too powerful, too resilient. All of his best spells barely irritated her. Even presuming that he could force her into a close-range duel, she was still physically his superior. And she had a mastery of those light weapons of hers that likely far exceeded his own burgeoning skill with his swords. Plus, who knows what else she had up her sleeve. That was the limit of being a basic human. At least it was without the intervention of the gifts of the God of the Bible. Come forth, twice critical, Issei shouted, mentally apologizing to Diedrag for misnaming his gear. In a flash of red light, the boosted gear appeared on his arm. Boost, a sacred gear, the fallen exclaimed. The rush of the boost was even more intoxicatingly powerful now, with his physical stats all over 100. It felt like he could do anything. Leaping into the air with a shout, Issei soared towards Armaros like a bullet. Drawing his gladius back, he filled it and his arm with more of his power before slashing at the fallen, who tried to block with her light sword as she had done before. Issei's blood metal gladius cut through the weapon of light easily, shattering it into motes. Despite her very obvious shock, Armaros still managed to mostly dodge the attack, the sole exceptions being a long cut across her cheek and a chunk of her hair. You dog, she howled and lashed out with a light spear she just created. Issei blocked it, but she managed to disarm him of his swordbreaker, such was the force of her strike. His weapon clattered to the ground below. Boost. Feeling the fresh invigoration of another boost, Issei flipped around in midair to land feet first against the wall, and immediately kick off again, heading right back at the fallen. What are you? She demanded as she flung spear after spear of light at him. No human should be this powerful, even with the aid of a twice critical. Issei didn't bother to answer. He had no intentions of letting her live. She had killed too many people to allow her to escape. He smashed light spears aside with lightning-quick slashes of his sword, his attention focused solely on his opponent. You can't kill me, human. I am a fallen angel. I'm over 5 centuries old. Armaros raged. I was slaying lowly humans before your grandfather's grandfather was a lusty look in his father's eye. You will fall like they did. A feral snarl came over him. Like hell he would. Slamming into Armaros, he stabbed his gladius into her left shoulder, actually managing to overpower whatever form of defense the fallen had. Sinking the blade in up to its hilt, Issei yelled as he was suddenly grabbed by her right arm and thrown bodily through a wall, and into the floor just in front of the door to the 3rd floor. You have lost 300 HP. You have just over 100 HP left. He had also left his gladius embedded in his enemy's body, which really sucked. It was a good thing that his boosted gear doubled his stamina as well as his strength. Otherwise he was fairly certain that last attack would have been a TKO for him. Oh, Issei gasped and then coughed. He was certain that he'd just spat out some blood there. Forcing himself to sit up, he looked up, meeting the enraged and incensed glare of Armaros as she stalked into the lab area, blade still jutting out of her shoulder. You scum. You so beneath my contempt you deserve not a name. The fallen shrieked. You dare spill my blood. You dare harm one who stands farther above you than you do over the lowliest bug. Crawl on the ground and beg for forgiveness, human. Seeing as how I'll get none, there's no point. Issei thought sarcastically. He strained and then stood up shakily, stumbling a couple of times, but managing to get to his feet nonetheless. More futile effort. The fallen snarled, although there was a surprisingly unnerved expression on her face. How? I've beaten and broken your body. You shouldn't be able to move, let alone stand up. So how are you standing? Ha you know all this time. I've never actually had to fight all out. Issei chuckled wetly. Nothing and no one has been worth it. You don't fight all out against weaklings, after all. Humph. And so what? Armaros snapped irritably. I'm saying, Armaros the lesser ... that I am now going to fight you with everything I have. The Seirkyude replied simply, noting the twitch in one eye at her much despised appellation. What do you say, partner? Boost? 3 boosts? No, that's not possible. The fallen narrowed her eyes at the crimson gauntlet in suspicion. That's no twice critical. What sacred gear is that? You aren't going to find out, because I am going to kill you, Issei stated, power surging through him once again. Gamer's gear. Game on. That ... what is that sacred gear? Armaros blinked in stupefaction as the blue armor of the gamer's gear appeared on Issei's right arm before her thought processes restarted. No, before that ... too. You have 2 sacred gears, all the more to pound you into the ground. The Seirkyude snarled as he charged forwards. Even as he ran, he reached into his inventory and pulled out another pair of mana potions, shattering them without even breaking his stride as he charged forward. It took the bloody and battered fallen a moment to react. Such was her shock at her enemy possessing multiple sacred gears. Having 2 was an almost unheard of outside of when Azazel implanted them into people. So seeing someone clearly outside of the Grigori wielding 2 sacred gears was a shock to the system for Armaros. And by the time she started to react, it was too late. Issei drew back his right arm, loaded it with enough magic to power a boatload of his fire spells, and launched it forwards in a powerful uppercut that slammed into the fallen angel's jaw with enough force to shatter concrete. It actually took her off her feet and made her eyes roll back for a moment. Enemy Armaros is stunned for the next 15 seconds. Perfect. Reaching out, Issei grabbed a hold of the hilt of his gladius and ripped it from its fleshy prison with a visceral splatter of blood and a yelp of pain. Stepping smartly around her as Armaros instinctively hunched over in pain, he loaded it with more magic and delivered a powerful vertical slice in between her wings, right over her spine. Gggghhh. She screamed in agony as she spun around, her eyes practically feral. There was no longer any thought or consciousness in those eyes, just an overwhelming bloodlust. Unfortunately for Issei, she had evidently made light manipulation an instinctive action for herself, as she snatched a spear of light out of the air and lunged at him with it. At the same time, Issei lunged at her with his gladius, aiming for her head. SHNK. Divided by SHNK. The 2 combatants met and froze before Issei staggered back and fell prone, the light spear piercing him through his gut, dissolving as he did so. Armaros choked out something unintelligible before reaching up with one hand to tug weakly at the blade lodged inside of her throat. Falling to her knees, she added her other hand to the effort and barely managed to tug the weapon out, letting it clatter to the ground afterwards. Shakily standing up, she clasped one hand to the gushing wound over the ruin of her throat and glared murderously at Issei one final time before vanishing in a cloud of black feathers. Silence reigned in the large facility before the lone mobile occupant shifted. One arm shaking, Issei reached inside of his inventory to pull out a health potion, eyes locked on the screen floating in front of him. Warning, you have 1 HP remaining. It is advised that you use some method of recovering your health at this time. 1 health point ... He had been just a single point away from dying. That was a more than slightly sobering thought. Crushing the potion, and 2 more after that, Issei finally found the strength in his legs to stand up as his health slowly regenerated. Unfortunately, his cuirass crumbled into pieces from the accumulated damage that he'd taken throughout the fight. Just what he didn't need, on top of everything else going on here. I'm going to feel this in the morning, the boy muttered as he opened his menu and unequipped the remnants of the cuirass. He'd like that armor piece, damn it. A whole lot of notifications were flashing for his attention, but he had a few more pressing matters to attend to ... such as grabbing his gladius and swordbreaker. He'd already lost 1 piece of equipment in this debacle and he wasn't about to lose more, fallen opponent or not. His gladius was positively dripping in blood and looked like it had seen far better days, so he placed it into the inventory very gingerly. 5 milliliters of fallen blood has been separated from blood metal gladius. How useful. It cleans as well. Does it clean the toilet on top of that? Recognizing that he was veering on the edge of mild hysteria from his near meeting with the Reaper, Issei tamped down and forced himself to calm down. Then he looked at the notifications that had accumulated while he was fighting for his life. As a result of a specific action, the skill Power Strike has been created. Power Strike LV 1.00. A basic application of reinforcement magic. Power Blow simply channels magic to the implement or body part the user wishes and adds strength behind the blow, adding not inconsiderable destructive force to that strike. Can only be used on either equipment the user is in contact with or the user's own body. Missile weapons are not a suitable target for this skill. Bows can be targeted, but unless enchanted to be unbreakable, there is a high chance of them snapping after a single use. Costs between 10 and 50 MP to use. The strength added to the blow depends on the amount of MP the user adds to it. The amount of MP is then multiplied by 2. As a result of repeated actions, the skill Heart of the Underdog has been created. Heart of the Underdog LVMAX. An underdog is used to the odds being not in their favor. On the contrary, the occasions when they do not have to fight and struggle with all their might just to survive are a rare and pleasant surprise. When they are faced with what most would call insurmountable odds, their defiance and determination become a palpable aura that unnerves their enemies. Passively increases LD by 10. If LD is not unlocked as a stat upon gaining this skill, it is unlocked as a consequence of gaining this skill. Only activates when the user faces an enemy over 10 levels above them. The user has no choice in whether this skill activates so long as they are determined to defeat their enemy. Once Heart of the Underdog is activated, the enemy or enemies are bombarded with waves of the user's determination, which acts as the skill Intimidation. Enemies who have a LD 50 points above the user's LD are immune to the effects of this skill. You have mortally wounded Armaros the Lesser. You gain 4000 EXP. As a result of your actions during the boss fight, you gain 5 SGP out of 6 SGP available. Achievement earned. Breaker of the Flambridge title acquired. Ambidextrous has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Short Sword Mastery has leveled up. LV6 LV7. Pain Resistance has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Pain Resistance has leveled up. LV2 LV3. Rope Binding Prison has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Blazing Bomb has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Fireball has leveled up. LV3 LV4. Lesser Barrier Shield has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Unison Shield has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Force Absorption Field has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Bronze Skin has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Lesser HP Regeneration has leveled up. LV5 LV6. Dual Casting has leveled up. LV1 LV2. Power Strike has leveled up. LV1 LV2. You have earned the title Skill Grinder. Issei whistled silently. That was quite the impressive amount of skills leveled at once. He was going to have to find a way to grind them more though. If nothing else, the fact that his skills were so low leveled had been a contributing factor to how closely won his victory was today. That would have to change soon. Another screen appearing caught his attention. Congratulations, Giant Slayer, for defeating an enemy twice your level. You are being issued a reward in lieu of the usual loot drop owing to the manner in which you defeated the dungeon boss. Please select 2 items from the 5 items below. A third will be awarded to you at random from the 3 you do not select. Skill Book, Hizen, Flying Slash, Blood Metal Longsword, Sacred Gear Upgrade, Dungeon Locator. Skill Book, Ryukin divided by Dragon Fist. Refined Blood Metal Cuirass. Free mandatory item. Quest reward, Jagged Dagger of the Draugr. Blinking, Issei tilted his head to the side slightly at this new development. The rewards here really were generous. Then again, he had just defeated someone who was twice as powerful as him, level-wise anyway. So maybe whatever entity inside the gamer's gear was giving him a kickback for doing well, perhaps. The quest item was interesting as well, but he would focus on that once he had left this place. Shaking his head, the Sekiryude examined the 5 choices. The 2 skills were interesting. One was the ability to turn his sword slashes into projectile attacks, similar to Roronoa Zoro and Hawkeye Mihawk in One Piece. The other, despite having the same name as Son Goku's favorite punch in Dragon Ball Z, was actually a projectile attack, forming and firing a missile of pure magical energy in the shape of a Western dragon. Better still, it was a homing attack, meaning the enemy could dodge all they wanted and the Ryukin would curve around, try and strike them again. With greater speed and reliability the higher the level of the skill was. The others were interesting too. The longsword was exactly what it sounded like, a long sword made of blood metal. Issei couldn't see if it had any special abilities or not, but he was betting that it did. The dungeon locator definitely piqued his interest, as it was an upgrade to the gamer's gear that integrated with it and allowed the wielder to detect and locate any dungeons within a certain radius. And it went without saying that the body armor was of high interest to someone who had recently lost his own set to combat damage. Juggling with his wants and needs for a moment, the gamer sighed and marked the refined blood metal cuirass and dungeon locator as his choices. Practicality had to take precedence here. Finding other dungeons now that all of the Purifier bases and Ratman dens he knew of were cleansed was a priority if he wanted to get stronger, and he needed to replace his destroyed armor as quickly as possible. Hopefully he could buy the skills in the store at a later date, and the sword wasn't that important as he currently specialized in short swords, not long swords. 2 items selected, now randomly choosing third reward. Oh yeah, he'd forgotten about that part. Done. You have been granted the Ryukin skill book. Not exactly what he was expecting, but he'd roll with it. Opening his inventory, he examined his new cuirass. Refined blood metal cuirass. Refined blood metal is very hard to come by, as it requires a master smith to forge it into its needed shape. This particular example offers more protection than you might imagine for light armor and has several other enchantments of use as well. Light armor grants 70 armor. All defensive draconic abilities have their effects enhanced by +15. All skills and attacks made with a bladed weapon add +5 to their overall damage. All blunt force attacks made against the wearer have their damage reduced by 15. As you might expect of an upgraded piece of equipment, it was very, very good. Over twice the protection value of his last one, and some very nice effects to boot. Issei equipped it immediately and then turned his attention to the other 2 rewards he had. Dungeon Locator. This is an upgrade to the gamer's gear that allows its wielder to detect and track down dungeons. Working via a form of magical radar, the distance, height differential and power of any dungeons within range are displayed to the user's sight. The locator is automatically set to lead the user to the entrance to the dungeon. Install into appropriate sacred gear. YN. The item was a blue square about the size of a satsuma, fitting easily into the palm of Issei's hand. Quickly pressing Y, he watched as the square flew into his arm and dissolved. 2 more white lines moved down his arm, on either side of the first one. That was new too. Reset. The sudden call of his second sacred gear caught him off guard. Then a wave of weakness made him fall to one knee, wheezing in exhaustion. Okay, so that was not a nice feeling. The loss of so much power has temporarily drained you of energy. You suffer the weakness debuff for the next 5 minutes. Lovely, just what I didn't need, on top of everything else, Issei thought sarcastically. Presumably, this was the drawback of overusing the boosted gear. The description for the boost skill didn't say that weakness would result from letting the 3-minute limit run down. But Issei was sourly certain that it was being updated with that information as he knelt there. Struggling to his feet, he decided to leave the Ryukin skill book until later. For now he had to grab Nia and get to the Heimjima shrine. Staggering to the door, he pulled it open and paused, deadpanning behind the menpo he wore. The ropes that had bound Raka Nia lay discarded on the floor, while the toilet door was slammed shut and the indicator showed that the room was indeed occupied by someone. Seriously, she was hiding in the toilet. What age was she? 5. Even while under the effect of the weakness debuff, which reduced his physical stats by 25%, he was still physically powerful enough to rip the door off its hinges. Unsurprising, as the plastic and light metal door was only intended to ensure the privacy of its occupant, not their safety. What greeted him was the sight of an empty cubicle and a wall hanging free. A secret exit. Pushing the secret door further open showed that there was a short passage ending with an enormous vault door that seemed to require a 16-digit code in order to gain access. Fuck me running, Issei growled, punching the wall in frustration. That woman might have been weak, but she was proving to be as slippery as a snake. Well, there was no point in sticking around here now that the project head had run with her tail between her legs. He went over and checked out the neurotoxin generator to make sure that the woman hadn't pulled a last-minute fuck you move on him. But apparently she'd just run like hell. Unsurprising, really. That piece of duty taken care of, Issei left the room after setting it to go into lockdown. No one would be able to get in there without the codes, which he had scrambled several times at random. Not even he would be able to enter the room now. Deciding to leave via the front entrance that Armaros had thoughtfully cut open for him, Issei headed that way after sending a few fireball spells at the corpses of the former zombies and flints. They wouldn't receive burials, but the least he could do was ensure they wouldn't just sit and rot here for who knows how long. Even the worst men deserved some respect in death. The door, when he reached it, was easy to pry open thanks to the damage Armaros had dealt to it. The passage after the door was, once again, blinding white. Seriously, Issei was going to have words with whatever asshole had been in charge of interior decoration for this place. Just before the final outer door was a security kiosk that Issei ransacked. If keys were a currency, he would be rich, because there were at least a dozen rings of keys there. What was interesting was an open file on the little computer regarding one final Purifier location in QO, one referred to as the Keep. There was no specific location given for it, just that it was somewhere in the southern part of QO. Noting that, Issei triggered the door mechanism and entered the lift that was behind them. There were only 2 buttons, one for the floor he was currently on, and one for the main entrance. He punched that one and waited for the lift to go up. Raindrops keep falling on my head. I am officially disturbed, Issei muttered as music played for the short time the elevator was in motion. Music. Seriously, today couldn't end fast enough for his liking. Stepping out once the elevator came to a halt, Issei was confronted with a false door that required a keycard. Not having the patience to find one, he just forced the doors open and then slammed them shut behind him, leaving the Securite in an abandoned house, the kitchen of one, to be precise. Peering out of the window, Issei spotted the factory that was the topmost layer of disguise for the now ransacked Purifier base. He didn't know why they had chosen to set things up this way, nor did he much care. All he was going to do now was walk home and go to freaking sleep. Reporting to the devils could wait until tomorrow. Elsewhere, Armaros the Lesser struggled to heal herself. This wound that she had been given by that filthy human was large, gaping, and positively refused to allow most healing spells to take. Her persistence was the only reason she was still alive. The defeated Fallen was where Azazel had assigned 4 other Fallen, Rainier, Middelt, Donasek, and Calawarner, to watch over the town for sacred gear users, an abandoned and derelict church. It was the only place she could think of to lie low and try to heal. Emphasis on try here, as the bastard human's gladius had severed her vocal cords, punctured her windpipe, and gone through the veins and arteries on either side of her neck. Repairing the last of the 3 had been time-consuming and painful, but also the most urgent matter if she wanted to avoid drowning in her own blood. As it was though, she was making almost no progress in repairing the rest of the damage to her throat. Fallen angels, most supernaturals in fact, had far greater resilience than any human, and came with numerous special skills. Angels, both pure and fallen, could turn their skin to the density of solid iron or beyond. As a defense mechanism, it was superlative against most basic forms of attacks, and the more wings an angel possessed, the more and more impressive the defense became. That red gladius had pierced through her iron skin like a bullet through a balloon. While only a 2-winged fallen angel, Armaros the Lesser had trained herself to automatically solidify any area that was due to be struck, and then, if the attack was particularly strong, to abandon fortification of all other areas to enhance the threatened area beyond what she could normally accomplish. When her throat had been pierced, should have been like trying to pierce through a solid foot or 2 of iron, and he'd accomplished it with a fucking oversized butter knife. Oh, I will have my revenge, human boy, Armaros thought darkly. I'll have you begging for death by the time I'm done with you. Well, if it isn't Armaros the Lesser. A snide voice spoke up, emphasizing the wounded fallen's least liked part of her name. Armaros glared at the entrance to the church, where a very beautiful woman with black wings stood, dressed in what looked like a stripper's outfit that flaunted her curved and toned body to all who saw her. Rainier smirked back at her, unafraid of the other woman. Do tell why a rogue operative like you is in my bailiwick, Rainier asked, forming a purple spear in one hand idly. The wounded fallen blinked before pointing at the wound in her neck sardonically. My, who did you piss off? One of the devil heiresses in town, the nominal leader of the fallen in QO asked. They certainly ripped you a new one, whoever they were. Armaros shook her head firmly. Not them or their peerages, eh? What about the migrant yokai? Rainier asked before blinking at the other fallen's head shake. Was it a member of any of the 3 factions or the court of the Cubi? Another head shake. Who then? You aren't going to tell me that it was a human who wounded you so badly, are you? The scantily dressed fallen joked, but her face went slack with disbelief at the firm nod that Armaros gave her at that. You ... you are kidding, right? A human, who isn't an exorcist or stray exorcist, did this to you. A human. Another nod was her answer. This is ... was he a member of the Chaos Brigade? Rainier demanded. A collaborator with the Teeps faction. Any faction in the world. At the continued denial of the fallen before her, Rainier scowled. Okay, so ... not affiliated with a faction, Powerful enough to kick your ass ... Shit. A newly awoken sacred gear user. A firm nod. Oh good. Rainier smirked cruelly. I can eliminate the threat myself. Armaros jabbed a finger at her throat again, clearly entreating for aid. Sorry, but traitors to Lord Azazel are to be put down, the other fallen said, making Armaros' eyes widen. Oh yes, you have officially been designated as a rogue. Didn't you hear me at the start? Lord Cockabeel was most disappointed in you. Have no fear ... As a favor for a fellow fallen, I'll end it quickly. With that, Rainier threw her light spear at Armaros, piercing her through her forehead easily. With how weakened she had been by her injury, the fact that she hadn't been able to muster any kind of significant defense against the attack was unsurprising. As the now dead fallen collapsed to the ground and began to dissolve into a cloud of feathers, Rainier turned to see Middle, a petite blonde-haired fallen angel wearing a goth lowly dress, appear behind her, giggling at the death of her fellow fallen. Serves her right for betraying Lord Azazel. Middle smirked. So what now? We keep an eye out for whoever the hell could fight a fallen into a state like that. Rainier replied seriously, all traces of sadism and glee absent from her face and voice. I hate her for betraying Lord Azazel. But Armaros the Lesser was well known for being a powerful and ruthless fighter. The fact that she was weakened so badly that I was able to execute her with one strike is telling here. Could you have fought her to that point without losing a limb? I know I couldn't. The goth lowly scowled. No, I couldn't. But still, a human. Even if she underestimated her opponent badly, I find it hard to believe that even a sacred gear user could have reduced her into that state. I'm sure she thought so too. Now look at her. Rainier jerked her head as the corpse finished dissolving into a cloud of feathers. We take things carefully, we take things subtly. We find out who did this and then we capture the Sonafabich and bring him or her before Lord Azazel. And certain a sacred gear user that matched a fallen, regardless of their power level, will be intriguing for him. And we'll get the reward. Middle squealed happily. You think of the best plans, Ray. Don't call me that. Rainier shook her head. Anyway, get Donaseek and Calawarner here, now. We have to prepare defenses in case this mysterious sacred gear user comes knocking. What about that nutso priest, Freed? The smaller fallen pulled a face. She acted nuts, but Freed made her look like a paragon of sanity by comparison. He's almost certainly from Cockabeel's faction like Armaros the Lesser there. Rainier frowned slightly. I think what he doesn't know won't hurt him ... or us, if he decided to go nuts if he hears about it. More nuts than he already is, I mean. And if he does, Middle asked, if he decides to act like a rabid dog, let him be put down like one. The older fallen stated with a grimace, swiftly followed by a sneer. He is experienced at slaying devils, but not at dealing with angels. We shall see exactly how good his skills are when facing an enemy his weaponry do not provide him a natural advantage against. Should he push things that far? Of course. Middle smirked. I think we're gonna give fun here, Rainier. So long as Lord Azazel is happy, so too am I, Rainier replied with a vicious grin. Now go get our brethren. We have work to do. Chapter 13, Challenge of the Welsh Dragon. Issei's bedroom, Hyoto residence. I'm exhausted. Issei groaned as he lay back on his bed. Having gotten back and eaten dinner with his parents, he was now relaxing in his room. His body was battered and bruised from his life and death struggle with Armaros the Lesser just a few hours previously. I almost died. Again. The Securyude mused darkly. How many times does that make sense that Purifier outcast almost murdered my parents and me? There had been quite a few times, almost all at the hands of the Ratman save his recent encounter with Armaros. The fact that the Ratman were still alive and active who knows where was both a worry and an annoyance, considering that Snitch had apparently developed a hard-on for seeing him murdered. Every time he stepped out of his house, he had to deal with groups of gutter runners and other Ratman assassins trying to ambush him. Luckily, they didn't come near Kuo Academy, his home, or when he was in any public place. But Issei could feel the little bastards glaring at him from concealment. A dark part of his mind was sincerely looking forward to the day he separated Snitch's head from his shoulders, and the rest of him was slowly starting to agree. That actually worried him a bit. The amount of bloodlust he was starting to feel toward that rat bastard couldn't be mentally healthy. One thing he was very glad about was that the blow that he had managed to deal against the fallen angel he had fought was a fatal one. On his way back home he had covertly searched the gamer's gear for its definition of a fatal wound and had come up with a wound that neither the target's natural regeneration, nor regular healing magic, can heal before all HP is lost. The one fly in the ointment had been the addendum to that part. This is, of course, excluding the use of healing potions, artifacts or sacred gears, as Issei hadn't gotten a notification taking back that lump sum of EXP he'd gotten for dealing aforementioned wound to Armaros the Lesser. It was safe to say that she hadn't access to any of the above, and was either dying or already dead. The fact he felt relief for this was also worrying, as he hadn't had that kind of outlook before he'd gotten his hands on his sacred gears. Speaking of gamer's gear, he muttered, game on. He'd gotten his hands on 5 out of 6 sacred gear points possible during his fight against Armaros the Lesser. The reason he hadn't gotten a clean sweep was because she had managed to flee the scene before he could deal the coup de grace. He guessed, if nothing else, he should invest those points in his gamer's gear before he went to bed properly, as Issei had decided the last time he had looked at his gamer's gear evolution screen. He immediately bought Sapphire Blade for 3 SGP. He blinked with surprise as a pop-up appeared in front of him immediately afterwards. Attention, you do not possess the appropriate skill to use this new ability of the gamer's gear. Do you wish to learn such a skill for 2,000 yen? Why, wait, it can do that? Issei asked aloud in surprise, as if I'd say no. Punching the Y key, the screen vanished to be replaced with another one. You have successfully learned Gauntlet Sword Mastery. Gauntlet Sword Mastery LV 1.00. The gauntlet sword is originally known as the Indian weapon called the pada, most commonly wielded during the 17th and 18th centuries. The name is a basic description of their appearance, a gauntlet with a sword emerging from the end. The length of the blades varied between 10 and 44 inches and were oftentimes recycled from European swords, often broadswords and rapiers, but homemade blades were just as common. The pada was at its most dangerous when used in combination with a second weapon. Allows the user to carry and wield a pada or similar weapon with familiarity. Grants +1 to slashing damage dealt with pada or similar weapon, with an additional +1 slashing damage if dual wielding a pair of pada. Owing to the various designs of the pada, changing the length of the blade equipped can allow it to also be affected by skills such as short sword mastery or long sword mastery in addition to this skill. As the pada is worn by the user as opposed to held like most traditional sword types, hand-to-hand skills can affect the damage dealt, such as hand-to-hand combat mastery. Cool. Issei mused aloud as he read the description. He hadn't expected to get a brand new skill like this all of a sudden, but he wasn't going to turn down the idea. Seeing that the next series of upgrades were also 3 SGP apiece, Issei decided to leave that for one day, and turn his attention to the new sword he had built into his gauntlet. Sapphire Blade, he muttered. Azure Edge. In an instant, a 2-inch wide blade, with a tapered point, shot up from the back of his hand and extended in front of his fist. It was underwhelming in how short it was. At best it was 10 inches long. Seeing a white circle at the base of the blade, Issei tapped it once and another screen popped up. Sapphire Blade Evolution and Growth Management. Thank you for choosing to evolve the gamer's gear to include the Sapphire Blade to be a part of its abilities. You are the first gamer to choose this option and thus you are to receive a reward. You are permitted to grow the length of the blade to whatever your preferred length might be for free. Just this once. Please state your preferred length aloud, in inches, to do so. Taking out his blood metal gladius and eyeing the length of its blade, Issei guesstimated that it was about 25 to 26 inches long. As the blade extended from where the wrist was on the gamer's gear, that was a good 3 inches or so of it that could be deducted from its reach. That being the case, he'd have to add that number to the blade length he wanted. 28 inches, Issei said aloud after returning the gladius to his inventory. SHNK. In an instant, the blade extended from its previous 10 inches to the length that Issei had requested. It looked damned cool, what with the fact that the blade was marbled with various shades of blue, with a couple of white pieces thrown in for effect. Overall, it was very nice. After that, Issei ran through the basic tutorial on how the blade worked. It was interesting in how it worked, almost like a totally separate sacred gear to the gamer's gear. At the moment, the profile of the blade was ... less than stellar. Brittle and weak sapphire blade. LV 0, EXP 0%, durability 20/20, slashing damage half S, piercing damage half S, bludgeoning damage a quarter S, abilities self-forging, weak durability regeneration, ability generation. It wasn't just less than stellar, it was goddamn awful. Yes, the part where all of the slashing and piercing damage from the sword was exactly half of what his STR stat was would be bad enough on its own. But the absolutely lousy durability was bad too. Combined, it made using the weapon more than slightly problematic. Fortunately, the first two skills it possessed, self-forging and weak durability regeneration, helped to mitigate that weakness a bit. The first allowed it to level up like he could, which meant that eventually it would get stronger, while the second regenerated durability very slowly at a rate of 1 DP per 5 minutes. That one would level up as the sapphire blade itself did or so Issei hoped. The third ability that the blade had allowed it to 100% generate a new skill at level 5 and every 5 levels after that, with a 5% chance of getting a new skill with every level the blade gained as well. That meant that if the roulette landed on that 5% every time, Issei could have a sword with 100 more skills. Of course, the likelihood of that actually happening was slim to none, as Issei was pragmatic about the fact that his luck stat was seriously screwed up to the point that not even the gamer's gear was able to quantify it as a number. The first thing Issei looked for once he had finished absorbing all of that was a way to possibly upgrade the sword's durability from its pathetic and paltry 20 points. He found good and bad news. On the good side, he could do it, but on the bad side, he was limited in what he could purchase based on the level of his sapphire blade. At its current level of 0, he could purchase, for 500 yen, a plus 30 durability upgrade ... and that was it. He wasn't about to say no to even so meager an upgrade as this, so purchase it he did. Now that it had 50 durability points, it would, hopefully, be less likely to shatter when he needed it. That reminded him, if a sacred gear was destroyed, would it regenerate? Something to ask the devils the next time he saw them. Dismissing both the sapphire blade and the gamer's gear along with it, Issei headed off to have a nice relaxing bath before he turned in. After the day he'd just had, he deserved it. Later, Issei's dreamscape. Whoa, Issei yelped as he was once more surrounded by fire. Yo, partner, D-Drag rumbled as he loomed over Issei. Been a while, D-Drag. How ... dreamscape visit, right. The boy calmed down as he assessed the situation. Yup, I would have talked with you on the actual day that you became level 15. But you taking the rare candies messed the system up a bit, somehow, the Welsh dragon said as he tapped one enormous talon on the flame-covered ground. It took this long for the stupid error to resolve itself. Anyway, I was watching as you fought that insane little crow, Armaros. You got very lucky. Yeah, I did. Embarrassingly so, Issei admitted with a sigh. Part of that is because you have been underusing the boosted gear, you know. The dragon looked down at him reprovingly. At higher levels, it shouldn't make you physically weak after the reset command is issued. Wait, how? You may be the main wielder of the gamer's gear, but I have discovered that I can summon it by myself as well. D-Drag explained, demonstrating as his right foreleg became blue. I can also see what the future forms of all the skills I have and can grant you look like. In the case of the boost skill, you should be able to use it without worrying about the weakness condition setting in when it is at level 10. That's useful to know. Issei nodded. I've kinda been keeping my usage of the boosted gear down because the local devils seem to be able to track me down whenever I go and raid a dungeon. The last thing I want is to expose all of my secrets to them. The massive dragon blinked. That is actually a far better and more forward-thinking reason than I would have given you credit for, partner, and a fair point. Still, you do realize that you could just buy a magic concealing trinket using the gamer's store. The Welsh dragon pointed out with one scaly eyebrow raised pointedly. Issei opened his mouth, shut it and stared into space for a moment before hitting his forehead with the heel of one hand. Damn it, now I know how Gremory-senpai felt at the shrine a while back. Talk about feeling stupid. D-Drag chortled. You really are entertaining to watch, partner. You can also buy something called a base core there, which would let you build a base wherever you want. I agree with your thoughts regarding those warrens that the Ratman used, too infested with warpstone to risk trying to turn into a proper lair. No self-respecting dragon would call a place so tainted home. This time, Issei felt his overreaching stupidity warranted an all-out facepalm, much to D-Drag's amusement. He really needed to take a long, hard look at the gamer's store and see exactly what it offered beyond spellbooks, if only to avoid feeling like such a dim-witted heel again. Once he got over that, he opened the gamer's store and searched for the 2 items that D-Drag had pointed out. When searching for something to conceal him from the devils, Issei made sure to include specifying that it had to block not only magical and spiritual tracking, but also Kai and something called Toki that he'd found referenced in a few items he'd skimmed. Issei smirked triumphantly. Here we go. The Aegis of Isis, a cloak, although it calls it a mantle, designed to ensure that any and all methods of magical, spiritual and martial tracking are rebuffed from the wearer, and that conceals the signs of the former emitting from the wearer. It says ineffective to equip for anyone over level 50. So I'll have to find something better once my level gets that high then. Sold. The base core was very expensive as in it would take every single yen that Issei had left after purchasing the Aegis to buy it. But it would be so worth it to complete the quest from D-Drake. Plus, money wasn't exactly much of a worry for him now that he could just find and raid a dungeon whenever he needed some cash. As he bought it, D-Drake nodded approvingly. Make sure you choose where to site it well, partner. I don't suppose there are any mountains or anything nearby, are there? Yes, there is, although they're more like hills with pretensions. The Sekyude answered with a blink. It's just about half an hour away if I walk, so I could go tomorrow if you want. It's a weekend, after all. I'll take what I can get. D-Drake grumbled. It would be most appreciated if you could do so, partner. Also, yes, Issei blinked. I have another quest for you, one that you must accept. The Welsh Dragon stated firmly. Quest alert. Challenge of the Welsh Dragon. D-Drake wishes for you to both further master the boosted gear and to learn better hand-to-hand combat skills. Complete his objectives and receive rewards. Quest Objective 1, raise the boost. Skill to level 10. Quest Objective 2, raise hand-to-hand combat mastery to level 10. Bonus objective, clear an entire dungeon while only using the boosted gear and your fists. Quest failure, if you die before completing them. Quest Objective 1 reward, 10,000 yen plus 4,000 EXP plus 5 AP. Quest Objective 2 reward, 10,000 yen plus 4,000 EXP plus 5 AP, hand-to-hand talent skill book. Bonus Quest Objective reward, Fist of Fury skill, 10 kick combo skill, Iron Fist skill, title, Fist and Man as one. This quest cannot be declined, and is thus auto-accepted. Can I ask why? Issei asked as he finished reading the new quest. All of my wielders have been skilled at barehanded combat, even those who specialized in the sword like Mordred Pendragon did. The dragon said gravely. While you have advanced leaps and bounds with your skills with a blade, there are spells and abilities that can cut off extra-dimensional space pockets such as your inventory. Being able to fight with just your fists is a necessity if such a thing occurs. Fair enough. Issei nodded. Well, the end result of working towards the reward is just as good as the actual rewards, so I would have accepted it anyway. Better safe than sorry. Some of my past wielders were stubborn assholes about the choice in weaponry bit. D-Drake grumbled. Seriously, I had to kick their dream selves around this dreamscape a couple of dozen times in order to get them to stop being idiots about it. Bloody weapon snobs. Sounds tough, Issei said, sweat dropping at the sight of a huge dragon pouting. Yes, well. The Welsh dragon coughed as he caught himself. It was irritating, especially those who refused to relent even after seeing the memory of one of my wielders, who was an excellent swordsman, get killed when he was separated from his blade because he couldn't fight without it worth a damn. Issei had to sweat drop again at that. To him, it seemed like a perfectly reasonable pair of lessons to learn. 1. If you are dependent on a weapon, do not be separated from it no matter what. And 2. Always learn how to fight without a weapon so you are not entirely dependent on possessing a weapon. Some of those senpai of his must have been really stubborn idiots to not take the hint after seeing that memory. Looks like time's up again, D-Drake said as the flames started to die out and darkness encroached again. Keep up the good work, partner. We'll need everything we can get to beat the White One. The next day, streets of Kyoto Town. Dressed in casual clothes, Issei walked down the street with his hands in his pockets. He had to admit, the weather was perfect for a walk to the outskirts of Kyoto, and he did like the sun on his face. It was pleasant to feel as he considered the mission that he was on today, choosing where to site his base. Aside from the modestly large hill that held the Shinto shrine that was apparently Himejima Akino's home, there were a good dozen or so near it to choose from. And given his choices, Issei would much rather keep it as far away from a known devil hangout to minimize the chances of them swooping in to investigate at the slightest hint of unusual magical readings. With that in mind, he was heading towards the hill that was furthest away from the Himejima shrine. It was modestly steep to climb and he would doubtless get a good workout climbing it. But with his stats, it would be fairly easy. Name, Hyoto Issei. Class, the gamer. Level, 17. Next level, 56% EXP. Title, Oppai Baka. HP, 850 over 850. MP, 675 over 675. STR, 145. STA, 141. Dex, 151. INT, 46. Wise, 46. Luck, Cha, 88. LD, 10. He was actually rather proud of how far he had come since he had started. His stats back then had been utterly awful by comparison. Well, his physical stats were still the best out of the lot of them thanks to his awakened Sekyude special status. He'd done his best with his mental ones, but they were only just a little bit better than his newly acquired LD stat. Issei had also learned the Ryukin skill that he'd acquired from defeating Armaros. It was modestly awesome. Ryukin LV 1.00. The Dragon Fist is a technique that only those who possess either Draconic Heritage or a Dragon-type Sacred Gear, as it requires Draconic energy to be used. Once the basic Dragon Fist is mastered, the user can move on to learn both derivative skills from the Dragon Fist and a more powerful version of the Dragon Fist. Requires either possession of a dragon-type sacred gear or possession of the special status Draconic Heritage to use. Costs 100 MP to use. Once activated, the user will cock back a hand and energy will gather, forming into a dragon's head. This takes 20 seconds. Once charging is complete, the user will unleash it at one enemy with a straight punch. The dragon's head will fly towards the enemy, roaring as it does so. Its current range is 5 meters. Once it strikes its target, it will inflict damage equal to Y's INT plus 10. It was expensive as hell to use, but once he had found a way to raise his MP, it should be fine to use. As it was, Issei would have to use it as a trump card to finish off his enemies. Hyodo, a surprised voice said from the side, and Issei automatically turned to see who it was. J. Murayama. What was with that J? Huh? The girl huffed. Murayama had her brown hair down from its usual twintails and she was wearing denim shorts, strap sandals and a rather cute-looking t-shirt blouse combination. Huh? Issei examined her with a critical eye before giving her a lecherous grin and a thumbs up. Nice look. 9 out of 10. Pervert. Murayama flushed bright red at his words. As she was distracted, Issei eyed her floating title. Murayama Keiko LV 16. Kyo Academy Girls Kendo Team Vice Captain. Aside from the Devils and himself, Murayama had the highest level of any student or teacher at Kyo Academy. Even Kades, the girls' Kendo Team Captain, was only level 15. Hey, Murayama, Issei said. TCH. What? The girl eyed him as if she wished she had her Shinai with her. Why aren't you the captain of the girls' Kendo team? I can tell that you're stronger than Kades, he said bluntly. Why? The flush on her face, which had practically faded, redoubled in its intensity. What the heck do you know about Kendo to tell that? When you both hit me after I peep on you, you hit before Kades, you hit harder than Kades, and you are more accurate than Kades, Issei said immediately. He somehow knew that to be true, but how he didn't know. Eyeing him doubtfully, Murayama nevertheless sighed. Fine. She's the captain because she's a better leader than I am. I can beat her in a match 8 times out of 10. But when it comes to inspiring others and boosting their confidence, I'm not the best. Kades is far better than me at it. End of story. Really? I think you're not seeing yourself properly, Issei said in surprise. He'd seen how well the girl had marshaled the girls of the Kendo Club to attack while Kades stood and spluttered at him and his friends after they were caught peeping on them. I think you do better than Kades. Honest. Haga. Murayama looked at him, startled and surprised, her mouth slightly agape in shock. Well, I have thing to do and places to go, so see you on Monday, Murayama-chan. He tossed that out there as he sauntered off. It was a couple of meters before he heard the sound of the girl being shaken out of her shock. Don't call me with Chan at the end of my name, damn it. Later, atop a hill, outskirts of Kyo Town. Phew. Issei panted as he leaned against one of the small outcropping of trees at the top of the hill. That had been a bit more tiring than he'd expected, mostly thanks to the team of gutter runners that had ambushed him halfway up the hill. He'd tried his hand at going at it barehanded and it was a lot harder than he'd thought it would be, so he'd equipped his Aegis of Isis, and then used both the boosted gear and gamer's gear to level the playing field. Aegis of Isis, a pure white mantle emblazoned with the Ankh symbol of Isis in gold. Isis was a goddess of magic in ancient Egypt, connected to the goddess Heku, who embodied magic to the ancient Egyptians. Isis' symbol, the Ankh, acts as a form of apotropaic magic, warding off the magic from enemies in order to prevent them from detecting the wearer, as well as giving a minor form of protection from offensive spells. Has no effect if worn by someone over level 50. Grants the wearer the skills high-level scrying concealment, high-level spiritual detection concealment, high-level Kai detection concealment, high-level Toki concealment, and low-level magic resistance while worn. He was so glad that he splurged on the Aegis of Isis rather than a couple of the weaker options. Even if it and the base core had drained him of all his cash. Still, he'd gotten a good pot of yen from the gutter runners and selling their equipment, so he wasn't completely broke anymore. Okay, so, where to place it? Issei mused as he headed into the middle of the small grove of trees. Just setting it up anywhere seemed stupid, really. He'd looked at the instructions before setting out, and to activate the base core was laughably simple. Just put it down. Empty your MP into it and voila, one hidden underground base ready for use. Still, it would be better if he had some idea of what would happen if he placed it in any given location. Were some spots better than others? Worse, he had no way of telling. Screw it, Issei huffed as he took the base core from his inventory. It was an orb about the size of a basketball, colored blue, with a large white spot on one side that made it look like a giant eyeball. Looking around, Issei placed it atop a largish rock near the base of a tree, and then placed his hand atop it. Base core setup. Do you wish to infuse the base core with all of your MP? Warning, once the process is started, it cannot be stopped. Y and hitting Y with his free hand, Issei groaned as all of his MP was sucked out of him through his hand. Removing it from the base core, he pulled out his very last MP potion and chugged it down. Had the stuff always tasted like blueberry muffins. Ding! Hearing an incredibly obnoxious sound that made him wince, Issei looked around, vaguely expecting to see a Windows 95 PC making that noise for some reason. Then he spotted the pop-up. Congratulations! Your base core has absorbed all of your MP, and is able to make a hidden base in the hill beneath you. Please select the layout that you wish your base to have. There were 20 possible choices, with the one at the top resembling the layout of the base you saw in XCOM. While that would be nice, Issei having always had something of a liking for that game. It always presupposed that the enemy either couldn't find the base or that there were sufficient numbers of people to fight off any attackers. At the moment, Issei was all on his own, so he had to give that one a hard pass. The one he ended up choosing was a setup that created an almost dungeon-like environment, several layers of underground labyrinths to protect an inner sanctum. There would be no direct access into the base. Instead, he could teleport in and out, anyone other than him, or any other person on the approved list, who tried to enter via magical means would find themselves landing at the start of the topmost level of the labyrinth, and have the choice of either retreating from there or trying to pass through the labyrinth and get their asses kicked. And, of course, if he was away from it, he would be notified of anyone trying to break into his base. Unfortunately, just his meager 600 plus change MP would only barely be enough to build a small core room, teleporters and one layer of the labyrinth, to say nothing of stocking it with monsters and traps. That was something of a shame, but the base would draw in any ambient magic and add it to the base core and its reservoir, allowing the base to slowly grow and expand. He could also sacrifice his own MP at regular intervals to speed up the process, but he could only do that once a week without risking overloading the core. Hitting the final button, Issei blinked as he was surrounded in blue for a moment before he was surrounded by bare wooden walls and standing on tatami. I in a 6-mat room, he muttered in disbelief. A 6-mat room was the smallest room size that could still be considered a habitable dwelling, in Japan anyway. Floating in the center was the base core, looking once again like a giant eye. Sourly, Issei deduced that his MP must have been really at the absolute lowest minimum to create a base. Otherwise he would probably have something more like an actual base than the cheapest room size in Japan. Without a prompt, a screen appeared in front of him, displaying the stats for his base. Base name, base level 1. Reservoir status, 0 divided by 10 million MP. MP gathering rate, 50 MP, half hour. Base upgrades, Gaia's Blessing. Inner sanctum size, 6-mat room. First floor size, 3570 meters squared. First floor type, maze. First floor defensibility, practically non-existent. First floor traps, none. First floor monsters, none. So it was worse. Okay, a lot worse than he had expected. There was that upgrade that he didn't remember buying or being offered. But first things first. Tapping the base name tab, he entered a new name into it. Keeping it just a layer of the Sekyude was more than enough to fulfill the quest ... he hoped. Quest complete. Here be the Dragon's Den. You have founded the beginnings of what could be a very nice base to suit your status as the Sekyude. It is, quite frankly, trashed here right now, but it is said that great things come from small beginnings. Quest completion reward, plus 3000 EXP, 10,000 yen special status, Blessing of the Dragon Emperor, plus 5 AP. You can stop quoting Uncharted at me, damn it. Issei grumbled as he swiped away the screen. Sic parvis magna indeed. Settling down, Issei decided to see what his new special status did. It was very curious. Blessing of the Dragon Emperor. You have been blessed by the Red Dragon Emperor, Ddraig the Welsh Dragon. Known for his immense power and might, he has been sealed up in the boosted gear for thousands of years since the Great War of the 3 biblical factions. One of the best known facts of Ddraig is that his flames were the most powerful and fierce among any dragon that has existed in the mortal realm. utterly consuming any who stood in his way, from devils to gods, the great and terrible blazing inferno of scorching flames. Although sealed by D-Drake himself, his blessing still grants you an incredibly strong affinity for fire-type magic, as well as a resistance against fire of any sort, whether it be mundane or magical. Plus 20% effect to all fire magic spells. Grants a permanent plus 15% resistance to any and all damage taken from fire of any sort, magical, mundane, or kai. Man, I guess that there's a lot I don't know about D-Drake. The Sekiryude whistled, impressed. I have to say, Blazing Inferno of Scorching Flames is a pretty badass name. A warm feeling in his left arm made Issei look down and see that the boosted gear had manifested all on its own and that the gem on the back of his hand was glowing bright green. Then the gauntlet vanished again. Evidently D-Drake approved of Issei praising his strongest attack. So that just happened, the boy said with a shake of his head. Then he manifested the gamer's gear on his right arm. Time to test out this dungeon locator of mine. Chapter 14, Asia, Tragic Exiled Nun. Later, Heimjima Shrine, outskirts of Kyo Town. Issei's little experiments with his dungeon locator had proven to rather interesting. The Sacred Gear add-on had projected a map in the air in front of him showing the area around him, in quite a bit of detail in fact, and displaying the locations of any dungeons within the detection radius of the device. His own base was there, in the very center and indicated with a green dot and name tag. The map extended over what had to be half of Kyo Town, and there were 3 other dungeons in that part of it. In very familiar locations. To boot, he had taken out one of the maps he'd taken from the office of the head of Project Rat King to double-check his suspicions. But he was correct. The locations of those dungeons were the sites of suggested Purifier bases that hadn't been made it past the proposal stage for whatever reason. And with the Purifiers having been infiltrated by Armaros the Lesser at the time, Issei was deeply suspicious about those sites, resolving to check them out later. After that though, he had decided that the devils had to be informed about Armaros and the Purifier genocide base, not to mention the dagger of the Draugr that Armaros had somehow gotten her hands on. Dagger of the Draugr, forged unwillingly by a captured dwarven prisoner using inferior materials and methods. This half-straight-edged, half-wave-edged dagger is a fell, evil weapon full of malice and hatred. While providing no special bonuses to attack, defense, or support, the effect of this blade takes place only if it is used to deliver a killing blow, reanimating those slain by it as undead revenants who desire the death of all things living. LV20. Durability 87/100th. Dagger / damage S plus 20. Pierce damage S. Bludgeoning damage S. Effect death blow reanimation. When used to end the life of a regular human or other non-supernatural entity, the fell magic of the dagger of the Draugr will use the energy released upon death to reanimate them as an undead construct. These constructs will be feral and the wielder of this weapon will hold no control or command abilities over them. To be completely honest, this weapon fucking terrified him. The fact that it was specifically designed to be used as a weapon against ordinary humans, and, if he was reading the intent behind the flavor text correctly, regular animals such as dogs, cats, and birds as well, was disturbing enough. But add in the fact that the user had zero control of the zombies they created and that they were simply left to kill anything they could get their claws on scared him to hell and back. This wasn't a weapon, it was a tool designed to cause widespread chaos, panic and death via initiating a mini-zombie apocalypse. Nope, not giving this to them. Nope. He had decided immediately. Granted, the devils that he had met were all good people and he could hazard a guess that he'd find that all of them would be horrified or disgusted with the effect of the evil little dagger and would rather saw their arms off with a rusty butter knife rather than use it. But other devils, for all he knew, there was a secret society that was conspiring to kill all of humanity inside the devil's civilization that would love a way to spread panic and terror amongst humanity by reverse engineering the enchantments on this dagger and mass producing it. Fuck, he just jinxed himself, hadn't he? Well, that decides it. I'm going to find some way to destroy this evil little abomination as soon as I can. Issei decided with a huff as he leaned back against the wooden wall of the shrine, once more clad in his concealing armor and outfit. He still had plenty of time before his parents expected him home, so the 20 minutes or so that he had been waiting was an excuse to take in the scenery. He was actually quite taken with the peaceful serenity that the shrine seemed to emanate. It was really quite relaxing. Ara, well, this is a surprise. I didn't expect to see you so soon. A familiar voice jerked him out of his thoughts. Looking around, he spotted on Heimjima Akino, dressed in the traditional white kimono top and red hakama of a miko. one of the two great ones Sama of Kyo Academy in Miko mode, saved to long-term memory. Issei cheered in his mind. Outwardly, he was able to control himself. He'd become far better at controlling his perversion thanks in no small part to the gamer's mind constantly suppressing it the moment his overwhelming lust came to the forefront. Haimjima-san, you look rather fetching in that outfit, he said with a nod. Why thank you. Akino giggled. Can I assume that you have a reason for being here? I am, rather sadly, going to need to talk to Heiress Gremory or Heiress Citri rather urgently. Issei replied with a sigh. I came close to being killed after I parted ways with you yesterday. Her purple eyes widened slightly. Akino nodded, all traces of teasing leaving her face and voice. Understood. As the reincarnated Nephilim flicked a finger, brought up a communication magic circle, and spoke into it. Issei pulled the reports and other files, memos and other assorted paperwork from Project Rat Poison out of his inventory. While it didn't seem to have a space, size or weight limit, having an overly cluttered inventory didn't sit well with Issei. That kind of thing was a stupid accident waiting to happen, particularly during a fight. He could reach in and mean to grab a sword or potion and accidentally grab an expense report or something. He could see it now. Behold my mighty ... tax return summary. Gods, that would be embarrassing. And possibly lethal. Suppressing a scoff of dark amusement at the thought, he waited for Ria's Gremory to show up, which didn't take long. She, and most of the rest of her peerage, showed up via a red transportation circle less than a minute later. What's this about you almost being killed? The crimson-haired ruined princess asked briskly as she walked over to him. Issei stood up as well out of politeness and walked down to meet her at the bottom of the shrine's wooden steps. I went to one of the last Purifier bases in Kyo that I was aware of, the site of Project Rat Poison. Issei stated bluntly. It was a charnel house in there. Almost every member of the Purifiers in the base were dead, killed by Agent Flamberge, otherwise known as the Fallen Anger Armaros the Lesser. You fought a Fallen. All of the Gremory peerage gaped at him in shock. And if only barely. The gamer tacked on as he started removing his gathered evidence from his inventory. I fought her until I had only a single HP left, but I dealt her a fatal wound in exchange, so she's likely dead by now. Ria shook her head slowly. You ... were very lucky, she said slowly. And ... this is the paperwork from the Purifier site. All of it I could find, Issei admitted. But that isn't the most disturbing part of yesterday ... this dagger is. He was nervous about even touching the disgusting thing, holding it by the hilt gingerly as if it were something foul, like a bag of dog shit. That weapon has quite the nauseating aura about it, Kiba said immediately, leaning backwards slightly. Trust a knight to sense a cursed sword. Kaneko shivered after glancing at it, before looking away and refusing to focus on it again. Foul, evil, she muttered. This is called the Dagger of the Draugr, and it was forged by the same dwarven smith who forged my rapscallion waveblade, the disguised gamer explained. It possesses the ability to reanimate any non-supernatural being killed by it as a zombie. The sickened looks on the faces of the devils confirmed Issei's opinion of them. Why? Why would someone? Akino asked, shaking her head in disgust. I suspect that it was the idea of Armaros the Lesser to have this ... thing ... made. Issei very reluctantly replaced it in his inventory. She was very much of the opinion that humans were a mistake of the God of the Bible. She really seemed to have something of a superiority complex. It was one reason why I won, despite her being twice my own level. She must have been one of Cockabeel's minions then. Akino noted, eyes cold with anger. The man is a fascist in the most extreme sense of the world and would happily slaughter every other race upon this world if given the opportunity. Correct? She was a member of Cockabeel's faction of the Grigori. The gamer nodded. I can't offer any proof of her presence other than that dagger, and even that isn't any kind of link to her though. Just about the only solid proof I have aside from the dagger is about 5 milliliters of her blood. My gamer's gear separated it from my sword after I put it into my inventory. The blood could be used for an identification spell, but I'm afraid it wouldn't do much good. Cockabeel has already covered his tracks and declared her rogue. The Gremory heiress scowled. He sent word to other supernatural and mythical factions that she has been rogue for quite some time in fact, and that he's only just found out about it. Political bullshit, in other words. Issei summarized. Well, at least it explains some of the magical stuff that the Purifiers have access to. If a cotter from the Grigori has been helping them out on the sly, to destabilize the other biblical factions. And how better to cause a war than to have the younger sisters of 2 of the 4 Mao mysteriously murdered ... is that you're thinking here? Ria said calmly. Essentially, Issei nodded. Cockabeel's aid would make sense for some of it, But if we take the time frame that he sent out to be how long Armaros the Lesser has been infiltrating the Purifiers, then it still doesn't add up. She was only rogue for 3 months at best, the redhead said in frustration. There must be another source of supernatural influence on them other than Cockabeel. Probably, the SeerKing agreed. That makes some sense. So either Cockabeel has been controlling the Purifiers from the start and Armaros the Lesser was simply one of the agents involved, or another supernatural force helped form them and Cockabeel somehow managed to slip one of his minions in and direct them to aid his own goals. Either way, at least we have removed one of the linchpins controlling these insane purists. I'd say that the latter is far more likely. Something like this simply does not fit Cockabeel's normal modus operandi. Aquino interjected thoughtfully. It's too subtle and offers too little reward for not enough return for the Grigori to be involved. They're the smallest of the 3 biblical factions, and I doubt even the Grigori as a whole, let alone a single faction of it. What of the sheer manpower to manipulate an organization as large as these Purifiers seem to be without it being noticed? And these Purifiers were also planning to target the Fallen as well. Cockabeel might be a racist warmonger to the extreme, but he still has some loyalty to his own people if nothing else. You seem to know a great deal about the Fallen's faction, Issei asked curiously. Someone I knew was once extremely close with one of the Fallen, the Miko responded evasively. Riaz winced, knowing that she was talking about her father, Barakil. Remembering him was painful for her. Very well, I will bow to your greater knowledge of the Grigori and the Angel of the Stars, Issei acknowledged. Still, I doubt he'll just shrug and give up. He may attempt something again, and be more direct the next time. I'll see to improving the magical defenses around our homes just in case that proves to be accurate. The Grimoire heiress said with a frown. Cockabeel was a fallen angel with 10 wings. He would be an opponent far beyond what her peerage could handle. Even the addition of Sona's peerage wouldn't matter much in the end. And she would never ask her friend to sacrifice her servants wastefully like that. I'll also be keeping an eye out for things around town, Issei said. Cockabeel has no friend in me, so you can count on me to at least report anything that smacks of his supporters or subordinates entering QO. How would you the titles people have? Heber realized, unless they have a particularly puissant and skillful disguise, they can't hide that sort of thing from you, can they? Issei was impressed and somewhat alarmed that the Prince of QO Academy had put the pieces together that quickly. Correct. Low to mid-level mundane and magical disguises don't hide someone's titles from my sight. After seeing Armaros genderbend out of her male disguise, Issei had double and triple checked about exactly how high a level of a skill or spell needed to be in order to spoof the gaming gear. That would be a help, I will admit, Riaz said with a nod. Having someone who could see through most common disguises aiding her would be invaluable. Still, I would have to exchange favors with you for this, as this goes beyond you passing information to us. You would be actively looking for enemies for Sona, and a Grimoire does not take such a favor lightly. Well, he wasn't going to say no to being paid, now was he? Only for work he managed to accomplish though. Only if I managed to bring you word of someone infiltrating your territory. Issei bargained. You can set the price based on what I bring you. Generous. Not many would trust a devil like this, the Western beauty remarked. You have extended me trust by not demanding to know who I am beneath this mask and helmet. The least I can do is return the favor in this instance. The SeerKing replied bluntly. Riaz Grimoire looked at him for a moment before nodding. Very well, I agree to your terms. Issei twitched as a window popped up in front of him. After reading it for a moment, he tilted his head slightly. The gamer's gear just generated a quest on your behalf. The devils blinked at him. It can do that? Aquino asked curiously. Apparently so, Issei replied. I wish it would work on its humor though. The quest is called Watching for Watchers of the Star Watcher. Because another name for the Grigori is the Watchers, I suppose. Riaz wrinkled her nose slightly at the very forced alliterative name for the quest. Is it like that all the time? More often than not, Issei admitted with a sigh. After a moment or two more of conversation, Issei departed the Heimjima shrine, pressing the Y button on the screen before him as he did so. Quest alert. Watching for Watchers of the Star Watcher. You have seen off Armaros the Lesser. Good for you. Now you have to keep alert and watch out for any member of his faction that you see within QO Town city limits and report it to Riaz Grimoire. Proof beyond your word would be nice as well, but she'll accept your word as a bare minimum. Quest goal. Report to Riaz Grimoire regarding any members of Cockabeel's faction of the Grigori that you spot inside the city limits of QO Town. Bonus goal. Provide evidence and/or images of the people you identify to better aid Riaz Grimoire and the devils in keeping track of the people in question. Ongoing quest. Quest reward, plus 3000 EXP per person reported, random fiscal reward from Ria's Gremory. Bonus reward, plus 3000 EXP per person identified in an easily transmittable manner, plus 500 reputation with Ria's Gremory, and Sona Citri, plus 500 reputation with. And quest failure, trouble on the horizon. Except, why? Issei made it back to his base and settled in the 6-mat room that was the base proper before he examined the other screens that had popped up at the same time he had accepted the quest. Reputation system unlocked. Congratulations, you have successfully reached the proper point to allow the gaming gear to activate the reputation system. For here on out, your actions and words will have an effect of how people, groups, organizations, and even nations see you once they are aware of your existence. Those who do not know of you will automatically have a neutral reputation with you, something that will change once they are aware of you. There are various stages of reputation. They are as follows. At war, whomsoever bears this level is against you without question. Minus 60% to any reputation gains to people in this group. Plus 10 to all combat-related actions against them. Hated, the bearer of this level despises you for whatever reason. Minus 45% to any reputation gains with people on this level. Minus 30% to teamwork if in the same party. Disliked, people on this level do not like you at all. Minus 30% to all reputation gains with people on this level. Minus 15% to teamwork if in the same party. Unfriendly, while not against you, this level means that they don't exactly welcome you with open arms either. 10% to all reputation gains with people on this level. Minus 5% to teamwork if in the same party. Neutral, not for you, not against you. Hell, people on this level might not even know you. No buffs or debuffs at this level. Friendly, people on this level like you. You're a friend. Plus 10% to reputation gains. Plus 5% to teamwork if in the same party. Well liked, you're a buddy, you're a pal. Plus 20% to reputation gains. Plus 10% to teamwork if in the same party. Honored, you are treated with great respect and friendliness. Plus 25% to reputation gains. Plus 15% to teamwork if in the same party. Exalted, you've reached the top. Utmost love, respect, and friendliness at this level. Plus 30% to reputation gains. Plus 20% to teamwork if in the same party. With an additional plus 10% if the reputation bar is maxed out. Of course, this is for people. There are differing tables for organizations, businesses, and nations that you have or lack reputation with, which you can look up later by saying reputation to open the reputation page. Just so you know, you are currently at a neutral relationship with Ria's Gremory, mostly due to the runaround that you gave her at the Ratman burrows and setting a pack of giant rats on her peerage. You might want to do something about that. Up to you whether you take the advice or not. Well, that's something, Issei remarked with a blink of surprise. It was something he'd seen in certain Galge, Eroge, and other dating sim-type games, so it made sense that the gaming gear would have it to cover the social aspect of life. At a guess, he hadn't interacted with enough people who knew about the sacred gear enough times before now in order to activate it. Dismissing that screen, he pulled up the second, which was basically a list of reputation gains with both Ria's Gremory and Sona Citri due to him handing over all of that paperwork he'd taken from Project Rat Poison. It was, he calculated, just about half a point of reputation per page that he'd handed over. The third page was the acquisition of a new skill. As a result of a specific action, the skill dealmaking has been created. Dealmaking LV1, 0%. Dealmaking is a skill as old as the first iteration of politics, whereby people bargained for food with tools and crude money. It got more political as tribes formed out of primitive man and positions within tribes became a source of greater respect. Over the millennia, the ability to forge deals has been a key part of society, and a vital tool for survival in any political arena. As you seem to be determined to involve yourself with devils, it's a very good thing you created this skill, isn't it? Grants a plus 1% chance to the success of any deal being made between yourself and another party. As a skill, it was underwhelming, and the snark from whatever bedamned entity was inside his sacred gear didn't help much. But it did have a point. The saying making a deal with a devil had to have some reason for its existence, after all. After dismissing the screen, Issei looked up something that had bugged him since it had appeared. The Gaia's Blessing upgrade that his base possessed. He hadn't purchased it, and D-Drag had nothing to do with Gaia as far as he knew, so it likely had something to do with the gaming gear. So he opened his base interface and pressed the button to bring up the information about the blessing. Gaia's blessing, a gift to one who bears the sacred gear representing her. This blessing of the primordial earth goddess multiplies the amount of ambient MP drawn into the base by 4 times the stated amount per hour so long as the base is built underground. It also reduces the cost of any earth, rock, or stone monster summoned or created within the labyrinth by half of its cost. Issei's jaw was dangling somewhere around his ankles as he read the short paragraph. It quadrupled his base's hourly MP gathering. That was 400 MP per hour. That was insane. And the discount to the 3 types of monsters he could make in the labyrinth above the base was also pretty damn good. Snapping his fingers in realization, Issei pulled out the book that contained golem magic that he'd gotten a hold of a while back. Summoning and commanding minions wasn't something he could see as meshing well with his fighting style, so he'd wondered if he should just sell it to the store. But now that he had this base, he was considering something. Standing up, he reached out and tapped the floating core of the base with the book, which made a screen pop up, as he'd hoped. Do you wish to offer the golem magic skill book to the base core to use in the dungeon? Why in? Let's see what this does. Issei cackled and hit the Y key. The book dissolved into motes of blue light and entered the base core. After a moment, another window popped up. Golem magic absorbed. You can now create golems as monsters inside the labyrinth. As golem magic is only at level 1, only 4 types of golems can be unlocked at this time. Do you wish to select which golems are unlocked, randomize, or merely select what element the unlocked golems should be before randomizing? Select, randomize, designate element and randomize. Considering the endless number of golems there had to be, Issei figured that simply selecting what element was enough. Granted, selecting the golems he could use would likely be beneficial, but he really didn't want to drag this out too long. Selecting Earth and then randomize, he waited patiently. Randomizing amongst Earth golems. Done. Blueprint, Dagu Golem acquired. Blueprint, Golem Dragon acquired. Blueprint, Brick Golem acquired. Blueprint, Eternal Mud Golem acquired. That was quick. Issei blinked before the screen changed, bringing up the stats and descriptions of the monsters. Dagu Golem, LV1 LV10. An Earth Golem made in the image of a Dagu, a prehistoric piece of Japanese statuary. To be precise, this particular blueprint resembles the type of Dagu made in the Jomon period, and the most well-known type of Dagu. While a Dagu golem has no moving legs or arms, it is able to levitate in order to move and attacks by firing beams of focused mana from its eyes. While not a very strong adversary, it is cheap and easy to mass-produce to use in human wave tactics. HP 100-600. MP NA. STR 1-3. STA 10-25. Dex 1-5. INT 0. Wise 0. Skills Levitation, Mana Beams, Golem Core. Golem Dragon, LV5 LV15. A rock golem made in the image of the type of dragon known as a land dragon, a breed of dragon that has only atrophied. Vestigial wings remaining by some quirk of evolution. Slow and bulky, about the size of a cart horse, the main use for these golems is to shield weaker and more fragile golems from attack. If needs must, the golem dragon can attack with its large and heavy front limbs. HP 300-625. MP NA. STR 15-25. STA 20-25. Dex 5-10. INT 0. Wise 0. Skills Rock Solid, Slow and Purposeful, Golem Core. Brick Golem, LV10 LV20. A golem made of numerous fired mud bricks assembled around a central core. First used in Egypt by wizard priests, it was spread to Europe and Asia by the magic users accompanying invading armies during the Bronze Age. Being made up of many separate individual pieces, a brick golem is able to change its shape and appearance based on the situation it finds itself in. The main disadvantage that this golem possesses is that it is easily scattered if struck with great physical force, exposing the golem core that empowers it. HP 50-400. MP NA. STR 5-20. STA 10-20. Dex 10-20. INT 0. Wise 0. Skills Body Disassembly, Body Reassembly, Dispersion Defense, Golem Core. Eternal Mud Golem, LV20. A very unusual type of golem created as a result of advanced alchemic processes gone awry. Its body is made of mud infused with a special type of liquid core, bypassing the usual golem weakness of having a single vulnerable point that can disable it if destroyed. Unless at least 95% of the body is destroyed at once, the golem will regenerate any damage dealt to it. On the other hand, it is expensive to make and requires some careful positioning, as it rarely leaves the place where it is created. To attack, it can spew mud for ranged attacks and elongate its limbs to use as weapons. HP 700. 1050, MP NA, STR 20-30, STA 35, Dex 25-30, INT 0, Wise 0, Skills, High Speed Body Regeneration, Amorphous Body, Core and Body as 1, Mud Shot, High Speed HP Regeneration. Issei had to whistle at the 4 golems that had been selected. All but the last had variable levels, and the first had a variety of uses from simple ZERG rush tactics, to range support, to flanking maneuvers. The Dragon one was a tank, plain and simple, designed to absorb damage and attract the attention of an attacker. The Brick Golem was a more generalist design intended to act as the mainstay of the Golem forces as it had the most balanced stats out of the 4 of them. As for the Eternal Mud Golem, its description was a very obvious hint to use it as a floor boss. He could see why though. The sheer amount of skills and the sheer strength that the damn monster were practically shouting at him to use me as a boss. Checking the time, Issei resolved to build up his base's first floor after a few days passed, but right now he needed to head home for dinner. A few days of MP absorption should give him plenty to play with. 4 days later, after school, shopping district, Kyo Town. Stepping lightly down the street, Issei smiled rather cheerily as he did some window shopping. The last few days, he hadn't gone near his base at all to allow the MP to accumulate. By the time he went back 5 days after the base had been created, there should be somewhere along the region of 48,000 MP in the core, which would be more than enough to plant a few monsters on the first floor, as well as unlock traps and possibly create a second floor as well. If Gaia's blessing hadn't been there, I would only be able to count on about 12,000 MP by tomorrow. The Sekiryude mused with a smirk. I could have still worked with that much, but I'm not going to look a gift horse in the mouth on this one. I need a secure base to fall back on for my family if someone manages to stumble onto the fact that the Red Armored Man and Hyoto Issei are the same person. And a 6-mat room ain't doing it. He had, instead of going to his base, spent the past few days scouting out the rest of Kyo in order to use the dungeon locator app to locate as many of the dungeons as he could. In addition to the 3 that he'd discovered with his first use, there were 2 more on the other side of town. He'd gotten close enough to discover each of their names and minimum level requirements. The Dungeon of 6 Realms, the Dwelling of Mages, the Castle of Yakai, the Ruin of Golems, the Hall of Puppets and the Lair of Beasts. None of them exactly sounded inviting. Out of all of them, the first one sounded like it might have to do with the 6 worlds of Buddhism, and that didn't endear him to that one even more. Issei was brought out of his thoughts by a child running past and almost knocking him over. Blinking, he looked around as the change in scenery registered. Issei rolled his eyes at himself as he realized he'd gotten so lost in thought that he'd wandered into the damned park. Yep, a cute-sounding voice cried out and Issei turned around just in time to see a girl trip over and expose her pure white panties as her dress flew up. Ooh wow, pure white for the win. He enthused to himself. 10/10 would see again. Snapping himself out of his staring, he moved over to see if the girl needed any help. She had just taken a tumble, after all. Are you all right, miss? He asked her as she managed to sit up, and he almost froze at the sight of her. The girl was simply adorable. She had long blonde hair half covered by a wimple, pretty emerald green eyes, and she had a kind of aura around her that was stirring up all of Issei's protective urges. Her outfit, now that he was actually looking at it properly, was a more elaborate, teal version of a Christian nun's habit. He blinked as he saw her name and title. Asia Argento LV-19, excommunicated holy priestess, a holy maiden, exiled. What on earth? Issei thought in confusion. The blonde girl looked at him and spoke in a language that Issei only vaguely recognized as being Italian. Seeing his confused expression, she muttered something under her breath before trying again. Hello, I'm fine, thank you, she said. Her voice was kind and sweet as a bell. He made a mental note about her sudden fluency in Japanese. Here, Issei offered her a hand, which she gratefully took. As he helped her to her feet, Issei rejoiced in the feeling of a girl's hand. It was softer than he'd expected. And sorry for the trouble, Asia said with a quick bow as she made it to her feet and released his hand. I'm Asia Argento ... or would that be Argento Asia considering the country? Western names stay as they are, Issei clarified for her. It's nice to meet you Asia-san. I'm Hyoto Issei, but you can just call me Issei. Issei-san. Asia smiled. It's very nice to meet you as well. Please, just call me Asia. Seeing the suitcase at her feet, the secretary asked, so have you only just arrived in Kyoto, Asia? Why yes, I've only been in the country for a few says and the town for a few hours, but the nun blushed slightly, and sort of lost. I was assigned to a church in this town and I can't read kanji very well. Issei was going to die from a cuteness overload, he was certain. How could one girl be so damned cute? Do you have the address written down? He asked her once he brought himself under control. I've lived here all my life, so I should be able to tell you where it is. The blonde girl brightened up at his offer before reaching into the leather bag she had on her hip. After rummaging around inside it for a moment, she produced a slip of paper that she passed to him. This is the old abandoned church near the edge of the hills. It's been left unattended since I was a kid. Issei frowned as he read the address. There are at least 2 other churches just outside of Kyoto that are newer and are more easily accessible to worshippers, so why send someone to try and restart this one? I smell something fishy going on. Asia seemed way too innocent to try and deceive him, so it was possible that she was legitimately being sent to this church by whatever denomination of Christianity she had taken vows with. But it didn't add up. The other churches had at least 1 priest and at least 4 nuns apiece. Are you being sent ahead to set things up, Asia? He asked as he put on a face of pondering. No, I'm being sent to help the priest that's already stationed there, Father Fried Selzen. The nun replied, and that was another incongruity. Asia was Italian, while this Fried character sounded Italian as well. Why was a Japanese church supposedly being run by a foreigner when the other 2 churches nearby were run by native Japanese? Add in her excommunicated holy priestess title and it was clear that something was afoot. Due to your clearly out of character good reasoning, insight and paranoia, you gain +5 Ys and INT. Damned sacred gear. Issei thought crossly before returning his attention to Asia. I'm sorry, but is it possible you have the wrong address, Asia? He asked. This belongs to an abandoned church that's been unused since I was a child. I am sure it's the right address, Issei-san. Asia seemed to droop unhappily. For whatever reason, he really didn't want Asia to go to this church. It was however not possible to just say, oh, I have a really bad feeling about this church, Asia, so don't go there. As nice as Asia was, it was always possible she'd take offense at him saying that for no reason. Okay then, I'll lead you there, Issei said with a sigh. But I want you to be careful, Asia. I'm getting a bad feeling about that church. There have been a lot of strange things going on around here recently, and an abandoned church all of a sudden getting staffed is another one. I'll be careful, Issei-san. The sweet girl promised. Okay. Issei was reluctant, but he had promised. Leading her through the part and streets of Kyoto town, he watched Asia looking around in childish wonder at what was to him just his hometown. He got the impression of quite a bit of naivete regarding regular, everyday life from the girl. That wasn't the most astonishing thing about her though. Before they had left the park, she had healed a young boy using what he could tell was a sacred gear of some sort. Sacred gears were created by the Christian God of the Bible, and Asia has one that is possibly very useful, so why excommunicate her? Issei wondered, hiding his agitation from the blissfully unaware Asia. They obviously once valued her highly if the holy priestess part of her title is accurate. What on earth could an innocent and sweet girl like Asia possibly have done to justify excommunication? He felt very indignant on Asia's behalf. Eventually, they came to a halt in front of the abandoned church. It sat atop a hill, with steps leading up to its large double doors. Back when he had been a kid, he'd had a Christian friend whose father, a priest, had occasionally invited the Hyoto family to attend church. Shortly after another one of the priests, Yigaki Masayami, had died in mysterious circumstances. His friend and their family had moved to England. He missed Rin. Anyway, the bad feeling he had about the church redoubled as a pop-up appeared in front of him. Dungeon discovered. You have discovered the dungeon Nest of the Fallen. You gain 400 EXP. Do you wish to enter this dungeon? Warning. Entering this dungeon whilst being 3 or more levels beneath the minimum level displayed is dangerous to your life. Why? Well now, that was just the icing on the cake, wasn't it? Well, at least he knew where the Fallen in town were hiding out. Now the question was whether they were of Cockabeel's faction of the Grigori or not. Also, it explained why Asia was here. Being excommunicated by the church meant that she had nowhere to go, and, rather than join the devils, the Grigori would seem to be a more reasonable group. He just really hoped that whoever was in charge here wouldn't be cruel to Asia. Subtly hitting the end button, he turned to Asia. Well, here we are, Asia. Thank you so much for guiding me, Issei-san. Asia bowed to him, which made him blush slightly, as she was bowing a bit too deeply for what he felt he deserved. It was nothing, Asia. He scratched the back of his head bashfully before pulling himself together. Listen, Asia, I don't know what's going on here, but this whole situation is worrying me. I'll be in the park where we met 2 days from now at around about the same time. If you want to speak to me, go there then and we'll talk. Okay. The nun looked at him shyly. Oh okay, Issei-san. I'll see you then. Why did she sound so hopeful? Was she lonely? She was just too damn cute. See you there. Issei smiled warmly at her. As she turned away, he muttered, observe, and then noticed another screen popping up. You have encountered Asia Argento. You are well liked by her. Oh what a nice girl. Shaking his head as he walked away, sneaking glances at Asia as she walked up the steps to the church as he did so, Issei really felt torn at this point. He had a really bad feeling that something bad was going to happen there, and he didn't want a sweet girl like Asia near it at all. On the other hand, without revealing that he too had a sacred gear, he couldn't help her without compromising his own safety. He tried to distract himself by looking at Asia's stats, some of which really surprised him. Name, Asia Argento. Title, Excommunicated Holy Priestess. Level, 19. HP, 440. MP, 513. STR, 20. STA, 22. Dex, 17. INT, 27. Wise, 19. Luck, 30. Cha, 50. Special status, Aura of Purity, Naive, Slight Dejiko, Draconic Affinity, Depressed, Excommunicated. Sacred Gear, Twilight Healing. Asia Argento was given over to the custody of the Catholic Church as a baby by her mother. Raised as a foundling, she took vows as a nun as soon as she was able. At some point during her childhood, she discovered that she possessed the rare sacred gear known as the Twilight Healing, which is able to heal almost any wound. As such, she was treated as a holy woman by the Catholic Church. Unfortunately, she healed a wounded devil recently and was excommunicated as a result. A vein beat a pulse on his head as Issei found himself glaring at the screen in front of him in anger. Excommunicated just because she healed a devil. What the hell? Gamer's mind activated. Forcibly calmed down by his sacred gear, Issei took a deep breath, let it out slowly, and started walking again. This time focusing his mind on the puzzle that was Asia's situation. Something about the way she was excommunicated rang false with him. Then it hit him. If Asia had been a holy priestess, then how could she have just stumbled upon a wounded devil? Presumably she had been guarded around the clock, and wherever she went would have been on church grounds. Did holy ground affect devils? A quick check using the gamer's gear said that yes, properly consecrated ground did indeed affect devils, striking fear into them if the consecration was powerful enough. Feeling mildly uncomfortable on a barely consecrated site. One of the last places devils would go if wounded, in Issei's opinion. To him that spoke of one thing about this situation. It was a setup. Asia had been tricked, deceived, and betrayed. In all likelihood, the devil had deliberately wounded himself before placing herself in Asia's path in order to get her kicked out of the church. Issei doubted that just getting Asia excommunicated was the devil's endgame though. Perhaps the devil in question wanted to make her one of their peerage. Twilight Healing would be an amazingly good addition to any peerage if it worked on devils. Something else to ask Gremory-senpai about the next time I speak to her. He thought icily. He'd examine Asia's special status at another time. Right now, he had a lot of aggression to work out. Bringing up the dungeon locator, he set the course for the dwelling of Mage's dungeon. Unbeknownst to him, a pair of figures were watching him from atop some nearby buildings. One had long crimson hair reminiscent of Ria's Gremory's and was dressed in a black and white suit. The other was a girl with her hair tied up in twintails and dressed pink and white outfit you'd expect a maho shoujo to wear. This is becoming intriguing, wouldn't you say, Sira? The man said to his companion. Yup, thanks for inviting me to look in on him, Zetsu-chan. The girl replied cheerfully. If he hurts Sotan, though, then you can introduce him to his own personal ice age. The man agreed placidly. He seems to be going out of his way to keep our little sisters alive though, which we owe him for. Things are going to become pretty interesting over the next few weeks. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. And comment down your opinion on this video. Thanks for stopping by and I'll see you in the next one.